There is a simple teaching in Buddhist wisdom that has comforted people for centuries. Much of our suffering comes not from what happens in life, but from our struggle against what we cannot change. Many people carry invisible burdens into the night. A conversation they wish had gone differently. A loved one they cannot protect from pain. A future they cannot predict. A situation they have tried to fix 100 different ways, only to find themselves feeling exhausted, frustrated, and powerless. The mind often believes that if it worries enough, plans enough, or holds on tightly enough, it can somehow create certainty in an uncertain world. Yet the harder we grip, the heavier life begins to feel. What starts as care slowly becomes anxiety. What begins as responsibility turns into a burden carried long after the day is done. Perhaps this is why so many people struggle to rest. The body lies in bed, but the mind continues working. It replays old memories, rehearses future problems, and searches endlessly for answers that do not yet exist. Hours pass, and peace feels far away. Buddhist wisdom offers a gentle invitation. Not to give up. Not to stop caring. But to recognize the difference between what belongs in our hands and what never did. There are things we can influence through kindness, patience, effort, and wisdom. And there are things that move according to their own causes and conditions, no matter how much we worry about them. Learning to see this difference is not weakness. It is one of life's deepest forms of freedom. As you listen, allow yourself to set down the weight of fixing everything. Allow yourself to step away from the exhausting habit of controlling every outcome. The world does not ask you to carry it all tonight. For a little while, let the heart soften. Let the mind become still. And perhaps, in the quiet space that follows, you may discover that peace begins not when life becomes controllable, but when you no longer need it to be. A timeless teaching of the Buddha tells us that suffering often begins long before a difficult event arrives. It begins in the quiet space between reality and expectation, between what is happening and what we believe should be happening. Many people assume that their stress comes from work, relationships, finances, health concerns, or uncertainty about the future. Yet if we look carefully, we may discover that much of our exhaustion comes from a different source. It comes from the endless effort to control a life that was never meant to be controlled. Perhaps this feels familiar. During the day, there are tasks to complete, responsibilities to manage, people to care for, and problems to solve. There is movement, noise, and distraction. But when the day finally ends and the world grows quiet, another reality begins to emerge. The mind continues working. It reviews conversations. It questions decisions. It predicts future difficulties. It searches for certainty. It tries to create guarantees in a world where guarantees do not exist. The body may be lying safely in bed, yet the mind is still carrying heavy bags filled with worries about tomorrow, regrets about yesterday, and fears about things that have not even happened. Many people do not realize how much weight they are carrying because they have carried it for so long. It has become part of their identity. They wake up with it, move through the day with it, and bring it into bed every night. The weight may appear in different forms. For one person, it is the need to know exactly what the future holds. For another, it is the desperate hope that someone they love will change. For someone else, it is the constant attempt to avoid mistakes, prevent disappointment, or make every outcome unfold according to plan. Beneath all these struggles lies the same hidden belief: If I can control enough things, then I will finally feel safe. If I can predict enough possibilities, then I will finally relax. If I can solve every problem, then I will finally rest. Yet life rarely cooperates with this plan. No matter how much we prepare, uncertainty remains. No matter how much we worry, tomorrow still arrives in its own way. No matter how tightly we hold on, change continues, moving through our lives like the wind moving through an open field. Many people spend years trying to carry responsibilities that were never entirely theirs. A father worries endlessly about choices his adult daughter will make. A young entrepreneur spends sleepless nights imagining every possible business failure. A nurse who cares deeply for her patients continues thinking about them long after her shift has ended. A recently divorced man replays old conversations over and over, hoping to find the exact sentence that could have changed everything. An elderly woman worries constantly about whether her grandchildren will be happy decades from now. The situations are different, but the emotional experience is often the same. Each person is attempting to carry something that extends beyond the limits of their actual influence. The mind believes that carrying the burden is an act of responsibility. In reality, it often becomes a source of suffering. Caring for something and trying to control it are not the same thing. We can care deeply without controlling. We can love deeply without controlling. We can act wisely without controlling. Yet many of us have never been taught the difference. Instead, we learn to equate worry with love, anxiety with responsibility, and control with safety. The result is a life lived in constant tension, as if we are holding a rope that never stops pulling. The hands become tired. The shoulders become tired. The heart becomes tired. And eventually, even sleep becomes difficult because the mind never receives permission to set the rope down. Modern psychology offers an interesting perspective on why human beings become trapped in this pattern. The human brain evolved to help us survive uncertain environments. Thousands of years ago, uncertainty often meant danger. A rustling sound in the darkness could signal a predator. A changing season could threaten food supplies. The brain learned to stay alert, anticipate problems, and prepare for potential threats. This ability helped our ancestors survive. The challenge is that the same system still operates today, even though many of the dangers we face are psychological rather than physical. The brain treats uncertainty itself as a problem to solve. When we do not know what will happen, the mind begins generating scenarios. Some of those scenarios are realistic. Many are not. Yet the nervous system responds to them as if they are already happening. This is why a person can lie awake worrying about a conversation scheduled for next week. It is why someone can feel anxiety about an event that may never occur. The brain's predictive machinery is attempting to create certainty. Unfortunately, certainty is often impossible. Life is fluid. People change. Circumstances change. Opportunities appear unexpectedly. Challenges arise unexpectedly. The future remains unwritten. Because the future cannot be fully known, the mind continues searching. And because it continues searching, it rarely rests. Researchers have found that the human mind often prefers certainty, even when the certainty is unpleasant. Knowing a difficult truth can feel easier than living with an unanswered question. This explains why uncertainty can feel so uncomfortable. The brain interprets ambiguity as unfinished business. It wants closure. It wants resolution. It wants guarantees. But life rarely offers complete closure. Sometimes relationships end without explanation. Sometimes opportunities disappear without warning. Sometimes illness arrives despite healthy habits. Sometimes success comes after years of failure. Sometimes failure follows years of success. Reality does not always follow the script we create in our minds. Yet many people continue investing enormous amounts of emotional energy trying to make life obey that script. They become directors of a movie that was never theirs to direct. They spend countless hours rewriting scenes that have already passed and controlling scenes that have not yet arrived. Little by little, this effort drains vitality from the present moment. The Buddha observed this pattern long before neuroscience existed. He did not use scientific terminology, but his insight into human suffering was remarkably profound. He looked at ordinary life and noticed that people were constantly struggling against reality. They wanted pleasant experiences to last forever. They wanted painful experiences to disappear immediately. They wanted certainty in an uncertain world. They wanted permanence in a changing world. They wanted life to follow their preferences. When life inevitably failed to meet these expectations, suffering appeared. This was one of the Buddha's most important observations. Suffering is not created only by pain itself. Much suffering comes from resistance. A painful event occurs, and then the mind says, "This should not be happening." A change occurs, and the mind says, "I want things to stay the way they were." An uncertain future appears, and the mind says, "I need guarantees before I can feel at peace." These reactions are deeply human. There is nothing wrong with them. Yet the Buddha gently invited people to look more deeply. What if the struggle against reality is creating a second layer of suffering? What if much of our exhaustion comes not from life itself, but from the constant attempt to force life into shapes it was never meant to take? Imagine holding a handful of water. The harder you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. Water cannot be controlled by force. It can only be held gently. Much of life is similar. Love cannot be controlled. Trust cannot be controlled. Other people cannot be controlled. Aging cannot be controlled. Change cannot be controlled. Even our own thoughts cannot be controlled completely. We can influence them. We can guide them. We can respond wisely to them. But we cannot command them with absolute authority. The Buddha taught that wisdom begins when we see this clearly. Not as a pessimistic truth, but as a liberating one. The moment we stop demanding impossible levels of control, enormous amounts of energy become available. Energy previously spent fighting reality can now be used for living. Energy previously spent worrying can now be used for presence. Energy previously spent resisting can now be used for understanding. There is a story about a man who lived near a rugged coastline where powerful winds blew throughout the year. Some days the wind was gentle and refreshing. Other days it was strong enough to bend trees and send waves crashing against the cliffs. The man hated this unpredictability. He wanted calm weather every day. Whenever the wind disrupted his plans, he became angry. Whenever a storm arrived, he became anxious. Whenever conditions changed unexpectedly, he blamed the wind. Over time, his frustration grew into an obsession. he began studying weather patterns constantly. He built barriers around his property. He created elaborate systems designed to block the wind. He spent years trying to manage something far larger than himself. The more he fought the wind, the more consumed he became. Even on calm days, he worried about future storms. Even when conditions were favorable, he remained tense because he knew they might change. His battle with the wind never ended because the wind itself never stopped. One afternoon, he encountered an elderly traveler sitting peacefully on a grassy hillside overlooking the sea. The wind was particularly strong that day. Waves rolled across the horizon, and tall grasses swayed rhythmically in every direction. Yet the traveler seemed completely relaxed. Curious and frustrated, the man approached him. "How can you sit there so peacefully?" he asked. "Can't you feel this wind?" The traveler smiled. "Of course I can feel it." The man shook his head. "Then why doesn't it bother you?" The traveler looked out toward the ocean before answering. "Because I stopped asking the wind to be something other than what it is." The man frowned. "That makes no sense." The wind ruins plans. It creates problems. It changes things. The traveler nodded gently. "Yes, it does. But tell me, how many years have you spent trying to control it?" The man thought for a moment. "Most of my life." "And how successful have you been?" The man did not answer. The traveler picked up a fallen leaf and released it into the air. The wind carried it effortlessly across the hillside. Then he said quietly, "You have spent years trying to stop the wind. Have you ever considered learning how to move with it instead?" The question settled into the man's heart. For the first time, he realized that the wind was not the source of his suffering. The endless fight against the wind was. The storms would continue. The seasons would continue. Change would continue. But perhaps peace did not require controlling these things. Perhaps peace required a different relationship with them. Many of us are fighting our own versions of the wind. We fight uncertainty. We fight aging. We fight the passage of time. We fight the behavior of other people. We fight outcomes we cannot guarantee. We fight realities that have already arrived. The battle can continue for so long that we forget another way is possible. Yet the Buddha's wisdom gently points toward a different path. Not a path of passivity, not a path of indifference, but a path of understanding. A path that recognizes the difference between what can be influenced and what cannot. A path that allows us to participate fully in life without demanding total control over it. As the night grows quieter and your body prepares for rest, perhaps there is no need to solve every problem before sleep arrives. Perhaps there is no need to control every outcome before allowing yourself peace. Perhaps some burdens were never yours to carry all the way to the end. And perhaps the first step toward freedom is simply noticing the rope in your hands and gently loosening your grip. Something remarkable begins to happen when we stop fighting reality. The circumstances of life may not change overnight. The unanswered questions may still exist. The future may remain uncertain. Other people may continue making choices we do not understand. Yet somewhere deep within, a subtle shift begins to take place. The heart becomes a little less tense. The mind becomes a little less crowded. The constant pressure to manage everything starts to loosen. Many people spend years believing that peace will come after life becomes predictable, after every problem is solved, after every relationship is secure, after every fear is removed. Yet for most human beings, that day never arrives. There is always another uncertainty waiting around the corner. There is always another change that could happen, another outcome that cannot be guaranteed, another situation beyond our control. If peace depends upon controlling all of these things, peace remains permanently out of reach. This is why the Buddha's wisdom is so compassionate. It does not ask us to wait for a perfect life before resting. It invites us to discover peace within an imperfect one. Many people fear letting go because they imagine that letting go means becoming careless. They worry that if they stop controlling everything, life will fall apart. But when we look closely, we often discover the opposite is true. The harder we try to control what cannot be controlled, the more exhausted we become. Imagine someone standing in the middle of a river trying to stop the water from flowing. The river continues moving. The current never pauses. The person becomes tired, frustrated, and discouraged. Yet the river remains unchanged. Now imagine that same person stepping out of the struggle. The river still flows. The water still moves. But the exhausting battle comes to an end. Life often works this way. Reality continues unfolding according to countless causes and conditions. Our resistance does not stop the process. It only determines how much suffering accompanies it. There is a quiet freedom that emerges when we stop demanding certainty from an uncertain world. We begin noticing things that were hidden beneath our anxiety. We notice the warmth of a cup of tea. We notice the sound of rain against a window. We notice the kindness of a friend. We notice our own breath rising and falling. These simple moments were always available, but a mind obsessed with controlling tomorrow rarely has time to experience today. The tragedy of excessive control is not merely that it creates stress. The tragedy is that it steals life itself. While we are busy trying to secure the future, the present moment quietly passes by. While we are busy preventing every possible disappointment, we miss the beauty already surrounding us. Consider how many precious experiences are overlooked because the mind is somewhere else. A parent sits beside a child but worries about the child's future instead of enjoying the conversation happening now. A husband shares dinner with his wife while mentally rehearsing tomorrow's meeting. A young woman takes a walk through a beautiful park, yet spends the entire time replaying an argument from last week. The body is present, but the mind is absent. Life is happening, but attention is elsewhere. This is one of the hidden costs of trying to control everything. We sacrifice the only moment we truly possess, while chasing moments that do not yet exist. The good news is that peace does not require us to solve every problem. Peace begins when we recognize the difference between what belongs in our hands and what does not. There are things we can influence. We can choose our words. We can choose our actions. We can choose how we respond to difficulty. We can choose kindness over cruelty, patience over impulsiveness, understanding over resentment. These things belong to us. But there are many things that do not. We cannot force someone to love us. We cannot guarantee success. We cannot prevent all loss. We cannot control time. We cannot stop aging. We cannot rewrite the past. We cannot know the future with certainty. Much suffering comes from confusing these two categories. We spend enormous energy trying to manage what belongs to life while neglecting what belongs to us. As you rest here for a moment, perhaps it is worth asking a gentle question. What are you carrying tonight that does not actually belong in your hands? Perhaps it is the need to know exactly what will happen next year. Perhaps it is the hope that someone else will finally become the person you want them to be. Perhaps it is guilt about something that happened long ago. Perhaps it is fear about a future that has not arrived. Perhaps it is a burden you have carried for so many years that you no longer notice its weight. There is no need to judge yourself for carrying it. Human beings do this. We hold tightly because we care. We cling because we are afraid. We worry because we love. Yet sometimes love becomes healthier when it is no longer mixed with control. A simple reflection can help reveal what truly belongs to us. Imagine placing every concern in your life onto a table. One by one, look at each concern and ask, can I directly act on this right now? If the answer is yes, perhaps there is a small step available. A phone call. A conversation. A decision. An act of kindness. A moment of honesty. If the answer is no, then perhaps what is needed is not action but acceptance. Acceptance does not mean liking the situation. Acceptance does not mean approving of pain. Acceptance simply means recognizing reality as it currently is. It means seeing clearly rather than arguing with what already exists. Many people misunderstand acceptance. They hear the word and imagine surrendering their dreams, abandoning responsibility, or becoming passive in the face of life. Yet true acceptance is none of these things. Imagine standing in the rain. Refusing to admit that it is raining does not keep you dry. Arguing with the weather does not change the clouds. Acceptance begins with acknowledging reality. Once reality is acknowledged, wise action becomes possible. A person who accepts the rain can choose an umbrella. A person who denies the rain remains soaked while complaining. Acceptance is not weakness. Acceptance is clarity. The Buddha never taught resignation. He never encouraged people to stop caring about life. Instead, he encouraged people to see clearly. Clear seeing allows wise action. When we stop wasting energy fighting reality, we gain energy to respond to reality. There is an enormous difference between these two approaches. Fighting reality creates exhaustion. Responding to reality creates wisdom. Fighting reality keeps us trapped in what should be. Responding to reality allows us to work skillfully with what is. Think about a skilled sailor crossing the ocean. The sailor does not control the wind. The sailor does not control the waves. The sailor does not control the weather. Yet the sailor is not helpless. By understanding the conditions and responding intelligently, the sailor can travel great distances. Life asks something similar of us. We are not asked to control every circumstance. We are asked to navigate them wisely. The difference may seem small, but it changes everything. One path creates endless frustration. The other creates freedom. There may be situations in your own life where this wisdom is especially relevant. Perhaps you are waiting for an answer you cannot force. Perhaps you are grieving a loss that cannot be undone. Perhaps you are facing uncertainty about health, relationships, finances, or the future. Perhaps you are carrying concern for someone you love. None of these situations become easy simply because we understand them differently. Yet understanding changes our relationship to them. A burden carried with clenched fists feels heavier than the same burden carried with open hands. As the evening grows quieter, notice your breathing. There is no need to change it. Simply observe it. The breath comes. The breath goes. You do not command each inhale. You do not force each exhale. Life is already flowing through you without constant management. Your heart beats without your supervision. The stars move across the sky without your supervision. The seasons change without your supervision. Much of life is unfolding perfectly well without your control. Perhaps this realization is not frightening. Perhaps it is comforting. Perhaps the universe has never asked you to carry everything. Perhaps your task was never to control every outcome. Perhaps your responsibility is smaller, simpler, and more human than you imagined. To act with wisdom, to love with sincerity, to speak with kindness, to learn from mistakes, to be present for the life that is actually here, and then to allow the rest to unfold according to causes far greater than your own plans. There is tremendous relief in discovering that you do not need to hold the entire world together. The sun will rise tomorrow without your worry. The future will arrive without your predictions. Life will continue moving forward, just as it always has. This does not mean your efforts are meaningless. Your actions matter. Your choices matter. Your compassion matters. But the outcome of every event does not rest solely upon your shoulders. So perhaps tonight, before sleep arrives, you can experiment with setting down one burden. Not forever. Just for now. Set down the need to know everything. Set down the need to solve everything. Set down the responsibility for outcomes that do not belong to you. Let the mind rest from its endless negotiations with reality. Let the heart rest from its exhausting attempts to control the uncontrollable. Let the body rest from carrying what was never fully yours to carry. And as you do, you may discover something surprising. Peace was never hiding at the end of perfect control. Peace was waiting beneath the struggle all along. It appears quietly when resistance softens. It appears gently when the grip loosens. It appears naturally when we stop demanding certainty from life and begin trusting ourselves to meet life as it comes. Nothing more needs to be fixed right now. Nothing more needs to be solved before sleep. The night is here. Your breath is here. This moment is here. And for now, that is enough. One of the gentlest and most profound truths the Buddha ever pointed toward is also one of the hardest truths for the human heart to accept. Everything changes. We may understand this idea with our minds, yet spend years resisting it with our hearts. We know that seasons change, children grow older, careers evolve, bodies age, relationships transform, and circumstances shift. We know this because we have watched it happen throughout our entire lives. Yet somewhere deep inside, there remains a part of us that still hopes certain things will stay exactly as they are. We want the people we love to remain close forever. We want moments of happiness to last longer than they do. We want success to remain secure, health to remain stable, and life to follow a path we can predict. When reality inevitably moves in a different direction, we often experience not only sadness but also resistance. It is this resistance that quietly creates much of the suffering we carry into the night. Many people who struggle to sleep are not simply tired. They are grieving changes they never wanted. Sometimes, the change is obvious. A marriage ends. A loved one dies. A career disappears. A diagnosis arrives unexpectedly. But sometimes the changes are far more subtle. A friendship slowly fades. A dream loses its meaning. A parent grows older. A child no longer needs us in the same way. A version of ourselves that once felt familiar begins to disappear. These quieter changes can be just as painful because they remind us of something we often try not to think about. Nothing remains exactly the same. Human beings naturally resist this reality. We often imagine that if we worry enough, prepare enough, or hold on tightly enough, we can somehow prevent change from happening. Yet change does not ask for permission. It arrives whether we welcome it or not. This is not because life is cruel. It is because change is woven into the very fabric of existence. The clouds change shape. Rivers change course. Trees lose their leaves and grow them back again. The cells within our bodies are constantly renewing themselves. Even while sitting quietly, listening to these words, you are changing. The person you were a year ago no longer exists in exactly the same form. The person you will be a year from now has not yet arrived. The Buddha encouraged people to look directly at this reality, not in a pessimistic way, but in an honest way. He saw that much suffering comes from demanding permanence from things that are temporary by nature. Imagine holding a snowflake in your hand and becoming angry when it melts. Imagine standing on a beach and demanding that the tide stop moving. Imagine becoming frustrated with autumn because the leaves fall from the trees. We immediately recognize the impossibility of these demands. Yet many of us make similar demands of life every day. We ask relationships never to change. We ask youth never to fade. We ask success never to fluctuate. We ask our emotions to remain pleasant and predictable. Then we feel shocked when reality refuses to obey. Impermanence is often misunderstood as a depressing teaching, but it is actually one of the most hopeful insights in Buddhist wisdom. If difficult experiences were permanent, healing would be impossible. If loneliness were permanent, companionship could never arrive. If grief were permanent, the heart could never recover. If anxiety were permanent, peace would never be found. The same truth that causes flowers to wilt is the truth that allows new flowers to bloom. The same reality that brings endings also creates beginnings. Impermanence is not merely the reason things disappear. It is also the reason transformation is possible. Think about moments in your own life that once seemed unbearable. Perhaps there was a heartbreak that convinced you happiness would never return. Perhaps there was a failure that felt devastating. Perhaps there was a period of loneliness, confusion, or uncertainty that seemed endless. Yet somehow life kept moving. New people appeared. New opportunities emerged. New understandings developed. The emotions that once felt permanent eventually shifted. This is impermanence in action. It is happening every day, often so gradually that we fail to notice it. The Buddha invited people to observe impermanence, not as an abstract philosophy, but as a living reality. Look at a candle flame. It appears stable, yet it is constantly changing. Look at a river. It seems like the same river from day to day, yet new water is always flowing through it. Look at your own thoughts. A worry appears, lingers for a moment, and then disappears. A memory arises and fades. An emotion arrives and leaves. Even the feeling of being stuck is itself temporary, though it rarely feels that way when we are experiencing it. One of the reasons we overlook impermanence is because change often happens slowly. We notice dramatic events, but we miss the countless small transformations occurring all around us. The child who once held your hand grows into an independent adult. The musician who struggled to play a simple melody eventually performs with confidence. The shy student becomes a leader. The wounded heart becomes compassionate. The fearful person becomes courageous. These transformations do not happen overnight. They unfold quietly, almost invisibly, until one day we suddenly realize how much has changed. There is a story about a young artist named Elena who lived in a mountain town famous for its cherry blossoms. Every spring, the valley became covered with delicate pink and white flowers. People traveled from distant countries just to see them. Photographers filled the streets. Families gathered beneath the trees. The entire landscape seemed transformed into something magical. Elena loved the blossoms from childhood. She painted them constantly. She filled sketchbooks with drawings of branches, petals, and blooming gardens. As she grew older, her appreciation only deepened. Yet alongside her admiration lived a persistent sadness. Every year, as soon as the blossoms appeared, she began worrying about their disappearance. Instead of simply enjoying them, she watched for signs of decline. Each fallen petal felt like a loss. Each passing day reminded her that the season was slipping away. One spring afternoon, she sat beneath a tree with tears in her eyes. Nearby worked an elderly gardener named Thomas, who had cared for the cherry trees for more than 40 years. He noticed her sadness and walked over. "You look troubled," he said gently. Elena glanced upward at the blossoms. "They're so beautiful, and soon they'll be gone." Thomas nodded. "Yes, they will." "I hate that," she replied. "I wish they could stay like this forever." The gardener sat beside her in silence for a moment before asking, if they stayed forever, would people love them the same way? Elena frowned. "What do you mean?" "If the blossoms never disappeared," he said, "would families rush to see them? Would travelers cross oceans to visit? Would artists spend hours painting them? Or would everyone simply assume they would always be there and stop noticing them altogether?" Elena did not answer. Thomas picked up a fallen blossom from the ground and placed it in her hand. "Their beauty is not separate from their impermanence," he said softly. "Their brief life is what teaches us to cherish them." A breeze moved through the valley, carrying dozens of petals into the air. For a moment, the blossoms seemed almost alive, dancing in the sunlight. "The purpose of a blossom," Thomas continued, "is not to remain forever. Its purpose is to bloom fully." Those words stayed with Elena for years. She remembered them when friendships changed. She remembered them when her father grew older. She remembered them when she faced disappointments and unexpected endings. Slowly, she began to understand that life was not asking her to hold on tighter. Life was asking her to appreciate more deeply. This insight transformed the way she saw the world. She stopped measuring value by duration. She stopped believing that something had to last forever in order to matter. She realized that a conversation could be meaningful even if it happened only once. A season could be beautiful even if it ended. A relationship could be precious even if it changed. A moment could be sacred even if it could never be repeated. Many people spend years waiting for life to become stable before allowing themselves to relax. Yet complete stability has never existed. The people we love are changing. We are changing. Our circumstances are changing. Our thoughts, emotions, and identities are changing. Rather than seeing this as a problem, Buddhist wisdom invites us to see it as reality itself. Once we stop arguing with reality, a tremendous amount of suffering begins to dissolve. This does not mean we stop caring. In fact, understanding impermanence often makes us care more deeply. We become more present during ordinary moments. We appreciate conversations instead of rushing through them. We notice sunsets. We notice laughter. We notice kindness. We notice the people sitting beside us. We stop assuming there will always be another opportunity later. We begin treating the present moment as the precious gift it already is. Impermanence also teaches humility. It reminds us that success and failure are both temporary visitors. The difficult season will pass. The joyful season will pass. Neither needs to be clung to or feared. Both can be experienced fully and allowed to move on. When we understand this, life becomes less of a struggle and more of a flow. We stop trying to freeze moments in place. We stop demanding guarantees. We stop exhausting ourselves by fighting the natural movement of existence. As the evening becomes quieter and the body prepares for sleep, perhaps there is comfort in remembering that whatever burden you are carrying is also changing. The sadness is changing. The worry is changing. The uncertainty is changing. Even if you cannot feel the transformation yet, it is already happening. Nothing remains fixed. Nothing remains frozen. Life continues moving, breathing, unfolding. Perhaps tonight there is no need to hold so tightly. There is no need to force certainty from an uncertain world. There is no need to make every beautiful thing last forever. The blossoms fall. The seasons turn. The years pass. Yet life continues offering new moments, new lessons, new beginnings. The heart can learn to trust this process. It can learn to soften instead of resist. It can learn to appreciate instead of possess. And in that softening, something peaceful begins to emerge. The mind loosens its grip. The body relaxes. The heart becomes lighter. You realize that the purpose of life was never to hold on forever. The purpose was to be fully present while each moment blooms. And perhaps that understanding is enough to help you rest a little more deeply, breathe a little more gently, and allow sleep to arrive with greater ease. Among the many stories preserved in Buddhist tradition, few speak to the human heart as deeply as the story of Kisa Gotami. It is a story about grief, but even more than that, it is a story about change. It is a story about the moment a human being discovers that suffering becomes heavier when we demand that life remain as it was. Kisa Gotami was a young mother whose entire world revolved around her little son. Like countless parents throughout history, she imagined a future stretching out before them. She imagined watching him grow. She imagined the milestones he would reach, the person he would become, the years they would share together. But life unfolded differently. Her son became ill and died. The loss shattered her. Unable to accept what had happened, she carried the child's body through the village, desperately searching for someone who could bring him back. Most people looked at her with sorrow. Some tried to comfort her. Others gently explained that death was a part of life. But grief has its own language, and in the early stages of loss, wisdom often feels very far away. Kisa Gotami could not hear what others were saying because her heart was still demanding that reality be different. She wanted yesterday back. She wanted life to reverse itself. She wanted change to undo itself. Eventually, someone suggested that she visit the Buddha. Filled with hope, she carried her child to him and begged for help. "Please," she said, "you must have a way to save my son." The Buddha looked upon her with great compassion. He did not dismiss her pain. He did not lecture her about impermanence. Instead, he gave her a simple task. He told her to bring him a mustard seed from a household that had never experienced death. Relieved to have a solution, she hurried away. She knocked on one door after another. Each family was willing to offer a mustard seed. But when she asked whether death had ever visited the household, the answer was always the same. A father had died. A grandmother had died. A brother, a daughter, a husband, a wife. Everywhere she went, she discovered that loss was not unique to her. Grief was part of the shared human experience. By the time the day ended, something inside her had begun to change. The reality she had been fighting slowly became visible. She returned to the Buddha empty-handed, but in another sense, she returned carrying something far more valuable. She carried understanding. She carried acceptance. She carried the first fragile glimpse of wisdom. Her son had not been singled out by fate. She had not been uniquely cursed. She was experiencing the same impermanence that touches every human life. The story is powerful because it reveals something many of us struggle to see. We often believe our suffering comes entirely from what changes. Yet a large portion of suffering comes from our refusal to allow change to be real. Kisa Gotami's grief was natural. Her love for her son was natural. What transformed her suffering was not the disappearance of grief, but the end of her struggle against reality. She stopped demanding that life return to what it had been. She stopped fighting a truth that could not be changed. And in that surrender, healing became possible. This lesson reaches far beyond the experience of death. Many people spend years mourning versions of life that no longer exist. They mourn relationships that have changed. They mourn opportunities that passed. They mourn younger versions of themselves. They mourn dreams that unfolded differently than expected. The object of grief varies, but the underlying struggle is often the same. Part of the mind continues insisting that life should still look the way it once did. Yet no amount of wishing can stop the movement of time. No amount of resistance can return yesterday. The more tightly we cling to what has already changed, the more difficult it becomes to embrace what is trying to emerge. Something remarkable begins to happen when we stop fighting change. Energy that was once trapped in resistance becomes available for living. Imagine trying to swim against a powerful current for hours. Every movement feels exhausting. Every moment requires effort. Then imagine turning and allowing yourself to move with the flow of the river. The river has not changed. The current remains exactly as it was. What has changed is your relationship with it. Much of inner peace emerges in a similar way. Peace is not always the result of changing circumstances. Sometimes it is the result of changing our relationship to circumstances. When we stop demanding permanence from an impermanent world, a tremendous burden begins to lift. Many people are surprised by how much energy they recover when they stop trying to control change. The mind becomes quieter. The body becomes less tense. There is more space for gratitude, more room for curiosity, and more openness to unexpected possibilities. Consider someone who loses a career they believed defined their identity. Initially, the loss feels devastating. Yet over time, if they stop fighting the reality of what has happened, they may discover new talents, new directions, and new relationships that would never have appeared otherwise. Consider someone whose life takes a path completely different from the one they planned. Years later, they may look back and realize that what once seemed like a disaster became the beginning of profound growth. Change often carries gifts hidden beneath discomfort. We do not always see those gifts immediately because we are too busy resisting the transition itself. There is another reason impermanence can become a source of comfort rather than fear. If everything changes, then painful experiences change as well. Anxiety changes. Loneliness changes. Grief changes. Confusion changes. The difficult chapter you are living through right now will not remain exactly as it is forever. This does not mean healing happens quickly. It does not mean loss becomes easy. But it does mean that life continues moving. The seasons continue turning. New possibilities continue emerging. Impermanence is the reason pain does not stay frozen forever. It is also the reason growth remains possible, no matter how hopeless a situation may seem. As the evening grows quieter, it may be helpful to reflect upon the many changes that have already carried you to this moment. Think back to a younger version of yourself. Perhaps there were fears that once seemed overwhelming. Perhaps there were situations you believed you would never survive. Perhaps there were disappointments that felt impossible to overcome. Yet here you are. Life continued moving. The person you were 10 years ago no longer exists in exactly the same form. Your understanding has changed. Your priorities have changed. Your relationships have changed. Even the struggles that once consumed your attention have transformed. Some disappeared entirely. Others became teachers. Others led you toward unexpected wisdom. Take a moment to notice how impermanence has shaped every chapter of your life. The homes you have lived in, the friendships you have known, the goals you have pursued, the versions of yourself you have outgrown. None of these remained fixed. Yet each played a role in bringing you here. Sometimes we focus so intensely on what has been lost that we forget to see how much has also been gained. We forget how many new beginnings emerged from old endings. We forget how often life surprised us in ways we could never have predicted. If you wish, you might gently ask yourself a simple question before sleep. What change am I still resisting? There is no need to force an answer. Simply allow the question to rest in your awareness. Perhaps a face comes to mind. Perhaps a memory. Perhaps a fear about the future or sadness about the past. Whatever appears, meet it with kindness rather than judgment. The goal is not to make the feeling disappear. The goal is simply to see it clearly. Often, healing begins when we stop arguing with our experience and start listening to it. You may also notice something else. While there are changes you resisted, there are many changes you welcomed. You welcomed healing after pain. You welcomed understanding after confusion. You welcomed growth after struggle. The same impermanence that takes things away also brings new possibilities. It is not an enemy. It is the rhythm of life itself. The Buddha did not teach impermanence to make people sad. He taught it to make them free. Freedom comes when we stop asking life to provide what it cannot provide. Life cannot guarantee permanence. It cannot promise that everything we love will remain unchanged. But it can offer something else. It can offer moments of beauty, connection, learning, compassion, and presence. These gifts become more precious when we understand they are temporary. A flower is beautiful because it blooms and fades. Music is beautiful because it begins and ends. A conversation matters because it cannot be repeated exactly as it was. The very fragility of life is part of what makes it sacred. As you prepare for sleep, perhaps there is no need to hold so tightly. The people you love can be appreciated without being possessed. The future can be welcomed without being controlled. The past can be honored without being relived. Life can be experienced without demanding that it remain unchanged. The seasons will continue turning. The years will continue unfolding. Change will continue moving through every aspect of existence. Yet this need not be frightening. Like a river flowing toward the sea, life has always been moving. You do not have to stop the river. You do not have to freeze the seasons. You do not have to preserve every blossom forever. You can simply participate in the unfolding, appreciating each moment while it is here and releasing it when it is time to go. And perhaps that is the deeper peace hidden inside the Buddha's teaching. When we stop fighting impermanence, we discover that life becomes lighter. The heart softens. The mind loosens its grip. The future no longer feels like an enemy. The past no longer feels like a prison. We begin trusting the movement of life itself. We begin understanding that change is not a mistake in the design of existence. Change is the design. And as this understanding settles gently into the heart, there is less to fear, less to control, and less to carry. There is only this breath, this moment, this quiet evening, and the simple invitation to rest within the flow of a life that has always been changing and always will be. Perhaps for now, that understanding is enough. Perhaps for now, it is enough to let the river flow, let the blossoms fall, and allow yourself to rest. If this reflection spoke to your heart, share in the comments one thing you are learning to let go of. And if you'd like more peaceful Buddhist wisdom before sleep, consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who may need it tonight. A quiet realization often arrives late in the evening when the noise of the day has faded and there is nothing left to distract us from ourselves. The body may be ready for rest, but the mind begins traveling backward through time. It wanders into old conversations, revisits painful memories, replays mistakes, and returns to moments that can never be relived, except in imagination. Many people assume that what keeps them awake at night is worry about the future. But just as often, it is an invisible attachment to the past. The mind sits in a room that no longer exists, speaking to people who are no longer there, arguing with events that have already ended. In those quiet hours, regret can feel heavier than any physical burden. A person may carry it for years without realizing how much energy it consumes. Regret is unusual because it often disguises itself as wisdom. It convinces us that we are learning from the past when in reality we are trapped inside it. It whispers that if we replay the memory one more time, we will finally understand it. If we revisit the conversation one more time, we will find the perfect words. If we analyze the decision one more time, we will discover how life could have unfolded differently. Yet the more we pursue the past, the further we move away from the life that is still waiting to be lived. Every human being knows this experience in one form or another. A retired teacher wonders whether she was too strict with her children when they were young. A businessman thinks about an opportunity he failed to take 20 years earlier and imagines an entirely different life. A woman who lost her husband replays their final weeks together, searching for signs she might have missed. A musician remembers a career-changing audition that went badly and wonders what might have happened if one small detail had been different. A young man re-examines a relationship that ended years ago and imagines alternative futures that never came to pass. These stories may seem different on the surface, but they share the same emotional pattern. Each person is attempting to revisit a road that no longer exists. The heart remains attached to a moment that time has already carried away. The Buddha understood this tendency with remarkable clarity. He observed that much of human suffering comes not only from pain itself, but from our relationship with pain. We often suffer once when an event occurs, and then continue suffering through memory long after the event has ended. One of the Buddha's most compassionate teachings encourages us not to pursue the past. These words are often misunderstood. They do not mean we should erase memory, deny our experiences, or pretend that painful events never happened. The Buddha was not asking people to become forgetful. He was inviting them to become free. There is a profound difference between remembering the past and pursuing it. Remembering is natural. Memory helps us learn, grow, and understand our lives. Pursuing the past is something else entirely. Pursuing the past means continuing to chase what cannot be recovered. It means trying to negotiate with events that have already completed their journey. It means repeatedly reopening doors that time has already closed. Many people spend years believing that if they think about a painful event often enough, they will eventually reach peace. Yet peace rarely comes through endless repetition. Imagine carrying a heavy suitcase through an airport long after your flight has landed. At some point, the suitcase no longer serves a purpose. It simply becomes weight. The same can happen with old regrets. Once the lesson has been learned, continued suffering does not create additional wisdom. It merely creates additional suffering. One of the most difficult truths to accept is that the past is finished. Not unfinished. Not paused. Finished. The conversation has ended. The decision was made. The opportunity passed. The chapter closed. We may dislike this reality. We may grieve it. We may wish it had unfolded differently. But reality remains unchanged. Much emotional exhaustion comes from trying to continue a conversation with life after life has already moved on. There is another subtle challenge hidden within regret. We often judge our past selves using knowledge we only gained later. A person looks back at a mistake made at 25 and criticizes themselves with the wisdom of 50. A parent judges decisions made during stressful years using insights that only became available decades later. We forget that the person who made those choices was working with a different understanding, a different emotional state, a different level of maturity, and a different set of circumstances. We expect our younger self to possess knowledge that had not yet been learned. We demand perfection from someone who is still becoming who they are now. Imagine meeting your younger self face to face. Imagine seeing the fears they carried, the confusion they felt, the limitations they faced, and the uncertainty surrounding them. Would you speak to them with the same harshness that you sometimes direct toward yourself now? Or would you recognize that they were simply doing the best they could with the understanding they had at that moment? The Buddha's teaching invites us toward this gentler perspective. Compassion is not only something we offer to others, it is something we can offer to the versions of ourselves who struggled before we knew what we know now. Learning from the past and living in the past are two very different things. Learning allows memory to become a teacher. Living in the past turns memory into a prison. Learning asks, what can this experience teach me? Living in the past asks, how long can I continue punishing myself? Learning moves forward. Living in the past stands still. Learning transforms pain into wisdom. Living in the past transforms wisdom back into pain. The difference is subtle, but life-changing. Consider a person who touches a hot stove as a child. The experience teaches an important lesson. The memory remains useful because it helps prevent future harm. There is no need to continue touching the stove every day in order to remember the lesson. Yet emotionally, many people do exactly that. They revisit old wounds repeatedly, believing that suffering itself is proof of responsibility. They assume that if they stop hurting, they are somehow minimizing what happened. In reality, healing does not erase meaning. Healing simply allows wisdom to remain after suffering has done its work. There is an old story about a traveler named Daniel who spent years walking between villages in a mountainous region. He was known throughout the countryside as a thoughtful and hard-working man, but he carried a sadness that seemed to deepen with every passing year. Whenever people spoke with him, conversations eventually returned to the same subjects. Missed opportunities, broken relationships, poor decisions, regrets from long ago. It was as though every memory had become a stone he carried wherever he went. One autumn afternoon, Daniel found himself walking along a steep trail that wound through pine-covered hills. The sky was grey, and a cool wind moved through the trees. Near the edge of the path sat an elderly monk resting beside a small stream. The monk noticed Daniel struggling beneath the weight of an unusually large backpack. "You seem burdened," the monk said kindly. Daniel laughed tiredly. "That is one way to describe it." The monk gestured toward the pack. "May I see what you are carrying?" Curious, Daniel removed the backpack and placed it on the ground. When the monk lifted it, he seemed surprised by its weight. "What is inside?" he asked. Daniel opened the bag. The monk looked inside and saw dozens of stones. "Why are you carrying rocks?" he asked. Daniel pointed to one. "This one reminds me of a business I failed to build." He pointed to another. "This one represents a friendship I lost." Another. "This one is a mistake I made with someone I loved." Another. "This one reminds me of an opportunity I let slip away." The monk listened quietly as Daniel explained the meaning behind each stone. Finally, he asked, "And where are you taking them?" Daniel looked confused. "What do you mean? You have carried them for years." Surely you have a destination. Daniel fell silent. He had never thought about that. There was no destination, no finish line, no place where he planned to put them down. The monk picked up one of the stones and handed it to him. "What did this experience teach you?" Daniel answered thoughtfully. The monk nodded. Then he asked, "If the lesson remains, why do you still need the stone?" Daniel did not know how to respond. Together, they sat beside the stream as daylight slowly faded. One by one, the monk asked about the stones. One by one, Daniel described the regrets attached to them. And after each explanation, the monk asked the same question. If the lesson remains, why carry the stone? At first, Daniel resisted. The stones felt important. They felt connected to responsibility, memory, and identity. Yet as the conversation continued, he began noticing something surprising. Many of the stones no longer served a purpose. The lessons remained clear in his mind. The understanding remained. The growth remained. Only the weight was unnecessary. As evening approached, Daniel removed a single stone from the backpack and placed it beside the stream. Then another. Then another. The bag did not become empty, but it became lighter. Before they parted ways, the monk said something Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. The purpose of memory is wisdom, not punishment. Those words stayed with him long after the meeting ended. Over time, he realized that he had confused suffering with responsibility. He believed he had to continue hurting in order to honor the past. Yet the past was not asking for his pain. The past was asking for his understanding. Many of us are carrying invisible stones. Some represent things we said. Others represent things we failed to say. Some are attached to losses we never fully accepted. Others are attached to identities we can no longer let go of. We carry them because we believe they are necessary. Yet if we pause and examine them carefully, we may discover that some no longer belong in our backpack. The lesson can remain without the suffering. The wisdom can remain without the punishment. The memory can remain without the attachment. This is one of the gifts hidden within the Buddha's teaching. He did not ask people to deny the past. He asked them to stop chasing it. There is an enormous difference. Chasing the past assumes that something essential remains unfinished there. Wisdom recognizes that life unfolds only in the present. The past can inform us, but it cannot contain us unless we allow it to. As the evening grows quieter and your breathing becomes slower, perhaps it is worth asking yourself a gentle question. What stone are you still carrying? There is no need to answer immediately. Simply allow the question to rest in your awareness. Perhaps a memory appears. Perhaps a regret. Perhaps a conversation that still echoes through your thoughts. Whatever arises, meet it with kindness rather than judgment. The goal is not to erase your history. The goal is not to pretend nothing happened. The goal is simply to stop carrying what no longer needs to be carried. Life is happening now. The air moving in and out of your lungs is happening now. The possibility of peace exists now. The people you love exist now. The opportunities available to you exist now. The past has completed its journey. The lesson may remain. The memory may remain. The wisdom may remain. But the struggle does not have to remain. And perhaps that realization is the beginning of a different relationship with yourself. One built not on endless self-correction but on understanding. Not on punishment but on compassion. Not on clinging but on release. The heart grows lighter when it no longer insists on reliving what cannot be changed. The mind grows quieter when it stops running down roads that lead only backward. And in that quietness, something beautiful becomes possible. There is space for healing. There is space for rest. There is space for gratitude. There is space for life itself. Perhaps for now, that is enough. Perhaps for now, you can allow yesterday to be yesterday and gently return to the only moment that has not yet completed its journey, the one you are living right now. There is an old Zen story that continues to resonate across centuries because it reveals something surprisingly simple about the way human beings suffer. Two monks, Ryokan and Tenzin, were traveling together along a muddy road after a heavy rainstorm. The clouds were beginning to clear, but the earth remained wet beneath their feet. As they approached a river crossing, they noticed a young woman standing at the edge of the water. Her clothes were elegant, and she looked distressed. The recent rain had turned the riverbank into thick mud, and she was afraid of ruining her garments. Looking at the monks, she asked quietly, "Would one of you help me cross?" Tenzin immediately felt uncomfortable. He remembered the rules of monastic life and believed it would be inappropriate to touch her. But Ryokan simply smiled. Without hesitation, he lifted the woman onto his back, carried her through the mud and across the river, then gently placed her on the other side. The woman thanked him and continued on her journey. The monks resumed walking. 1 hour passed. Then another. The path wound through forests and fields. The birds sang. The afternoon light softened. Yet Tenzin remained disturbed. Finally, unable to contain his frustration any longer, he turned to Ryokan and said, "Master, why did you carry that woman? We are monks. We are not supposed to do such things." Ryokan looked at him calmly and replied, "My friend, I put her down at the river hours ago." "Why are you still carrying her?" The question struck Tenzin deeply. In that moment, he realized something important. Ryokan had carried the woman physically for only a few minutes. Tenzin had carried her mentally for hours. The older monk's burden ended at the river. The younger monk's burden continued long after the event was over. Many of us are more like Tenzin than we realize. We carry events that ended years ago. We carry conversations that lasted only a few minutes, but occupy our thoughts for decades. We carry mistakes that happened once, but replay endlessly in memory. We carry heartbreaks, disappointments, embarrassments, regrets, and unfinished stories long after life itself has moved forward. The event happens once, yet the mind continues carrying it. A relationship ends, but we revisit it every week. Someone says something hurtful, and we continue hearing the words years later. A decision goes badly, and we continue holding ourselves accountable long after the lesson has already been learned. The suffering is no longer coming from the original event. It is coming from our continued attachment to it. This is one of the most compassionate insights in Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha observed that human beings often suffer twice. First, they experience pain. Then they continue recreating the pain through memory, resistance, and attachment. A difficult event arrives. That part is unavoidable. But then the mind says, "This should not have happened." It says, "I wish things were different." It says, "If only I had known." It says, "I should have done better." The original experience passes, yet the mental struggle continues. Sometimes it continues for so long that we forget what it feels like to set it down. The Buddha taught, "Do not pursue the past." These words are often misunderstood. They do not mean forgetting. They do not mean pretending nothing happened. They do not mean denying grief, loss, or responsibility. They mean something much gentler. They mean recognizing that the past has already completed its journey. It cannot be changed by replaying it. It cannot be improved by reliving it. It cannot be healed by endlessly reopening the wound. The lesson may remain. The wisdom may remain. The memory may remain. But the pursuit can end. Many people secretly believe that continuing to suffer is a form of responsibility. They think that if they stop feeling guilty, they are excusing themselves. If they stop replaying the memory, they are dishonoring what happened. If they stop hurting, they are somehow forgetting. Yet suffering and responsibility are not the same thing. Pain and wisdom are not the same thing. A lesson can remain even after the suffering has softened. In fact, this is often the healthiest outcome. Imagine a person who touches a hot stove as a child. The lesson remains valuable because it teaches caution. There is no need to keep touching the stove every day in order to remember the lesson. Yet emotionally, many people do exactly that. They revisit old wounds again and again, believing the pain itself is proof that they have learned something. In reality, wisdom does not require endless punishment. There is another story about a traveler named Daniel who spent years walking between mountain villages. He carried a large backpack everywhere he went. People often noticed how exhausted he looked. His shoulders were tense. His steps were heavy. His face carried the expression of someone burdened by something invisible. One afternoon, while resting beside a stream, he met an elderly monk. The monk noticed the oversized backpack and asked what Daniel was carrying. Daniel opened the bag. Inside were stones. Dozens of them. The monk looked confused. "Why are you carrying rocks?" Daniel pointed to one stone and said, "This one represents a friendship I lost." He pointed to another. "This one is a mistake I made years ago." Another represented a failed business. Another represented a painful argument. Another represented an opportunity he missed. Each stone carried a memory. Each memory carried regret. The monk listened carefully before asking a simple question. "And where are you taking them?" Daniel paused. He had never considered that question. There was no destination. No place where he intended to put them down. The monk picked up one of the stones and handed it back to him. "What did this experience teach you?" Daniel answered thoughtfully. The monk nodded and then asked, "If the lesson remains, why do you still need the stone?" The question lingered in the air. One by one, they examined the stones together. One by one, Daniel described the lessons attached to them. And each time the monk returned to the same question. If the lesson remains, why carry the stone? By sunset, Daniel had removed several stones from the bag. Not all of them. Just enough to notice the difference. The backpack became lighter. Before they parted ways, the monk offered one final reflection. The purpose of memory is wisdom, not punishment. Perhaps this is the invitation hidden inside the Buddha's teaching. not to erase the past, not to deny it, not to pretend it never happened, but to stop carrying every stone forever. Many people cannot move fully into life because their hands are already full. They want new beginnings, but they are occupied with old endings. They want peace, but they continue feeding old resentments. They want freedom, but they remain loyal to old suffering. It is difficult to welcome something new when every room inside the heart is already crowded. Imagine a house filled with boxes from decades ago. Every hallway blocked. Every room occupied. Every shelf covered. There is no space for anything new because nothing old has been released. Emotionally, many people live this way. Old stories fill every corner. Old disappointments occupy every room. Old identities refuse to leave. New joy knocks on the door, but finds nowhere to enter. New possibilities arrive, but discover there is no available space. Releasing the past is not only about healing. It is about creating room for life again. Something remarkable begins to happen when we loosen our grip on old memories. The world slowly becomes visible again. The present moment becomes richer. Relationships become more alive. Opportunities become easier to notice. The future becomes less frightening because it no longer competes with endless mental journeys into yesterday. Many people discover that what they truly wanted was never the past itself. They wanted peace. They wanted closure. They wanted freedom. For years, they believed those things could only be found by changing what happened. Eventually, they realized that peace comes from changing their relationship to what happened. As you rest and prepare for sleep, perhaps there is one memory that still feels heavy. Not the most painful memory, just one that still occupies more space than it needs to. Bring it gently into awareness. There is no need to analyze it. No need to judge it. Simply notice it. Notice the feelings attached to it. Notice the story attached to it. Then ask yourself a simple question. What has this experience already taught me? Allow the answer to arise naturally. Maybe it taught patience. Maybe it taught humility. Maybe it taught compassion. Maybe it taught discernment. Whatever lesson appears, acknowledge it. Then ask another question. If the lesson remains, must I continue carrying the suffering? There is no need to force an answer. Simply sit with the question. For many people, this question opens a door. They suddenly realize they have been carrying both the lesson and the burden as though they were inseparable. Yet they are not. Wisdom can remain after suffering has completed its work. Growth can remain. Understanding can remain. Compassion can remain. The weight itself does not always need to remain. The past does not require constant supervision. Yesterday knows how to stay in yesterday. It is only the mind that keeps returning. It is only the heart that keeps reopening old rooms. Yet those rooms remain unchanged. No amount of revisiting alters them. No amount of replaying rewrites them. No amount of longing reverses them. Life has already moved forward. Perhaps you can move with it. Not by forgetting, not by denying, but by allowing the chapter to become a chapter instead of the entire story. As the night grows deeper, there is nothing more you need to solve. No old conversation needs another rehearsal. No ancient regret needs another trial. No mistake requires another punishment. The road behind you has already been traveled. The lessons have already been gathered. The stones have already served their purpose. You do not need to carry them forever. Let yesterday rest. Let the old stories become quieter. Let the backpack grow lighter. Beneath all the noise of memory, beneath all the replaying and revisiting, there is a stillness that has been waiting patiently for you. A stillness that asks for nothing. A stillness that offers no judgment. A stillness that simply whispers, with extraordinary kindness, that you have carried enough. You can rest now. A great deal of human suffering comes not from what is happening right now, but from what might happen someday. It is one of the most curious habits of the human mind. The body remains in the present, but the mind rarely stays where the body is. It moves ahead. It travels into next week, next month, next year. It rehearses conversations that have not happened. It imagines problems that do not yet exist. It creates storms long before a single cloud appears. And while all of this is happening, life quietly continues unfolding in the only place it has ever existed, this moment. Many people notice this most clearly at night. The day is over. The tasks have been completed. The world grows quieter. Yet instead of resting, the mind begins working. A parent wonders what will happen to their children 10 years from now. Someone waiting for medical results imagines every possible outcome. A young professional worries about whether their career will succeed. A person struggling financially calculates future difficulties again and again. Someone who has experienced loss fears losing even more. The body lies safely beneath a blanket, but internally, it feels as though a dozen different futures are demanding immediate attention. What makes this especially painful is that most of those futures do not exist. They are possibilities. They are predictions. They are stories. They are mental images. Yet the nervous system often responds to imagined danger almost as strongly as it responds to real danger. The heart rate increases. Muscles tighten. Sleep becomes difficult. Anxiety grows. The future arrives inside the mind before it has arrived in reality. This tendency is deeply human. For thousands of years, the human brain evolved by anticipating danger. Those who noticed threats early often survived. The mind learned to ask an important question: what could go wrong? The problem is that the same mechanism that once protected us can easily begin controlling us. A useful ability becomes an endless habit. Preparation slowly transforms into preoccupation. Caution transforms into anxiety. Concern transforms into chronic worry. There is a difference between preparing for tomorrow and living inside tomorrow. Preparing is wisdom. Living inside tomorrow is suffering. Preparing means saving money, making plans, caring for our health, and acting responsibly. Living inside tomorrow means mentally rehearsing every possible disaster, every possible disappointment, every possible failure. One leads to action. The other leads to exhaustion. Yet many people confuse the two. They believe worry is helping. They believe anxiety is protecting them. They believe constant mental activity is a form of responsibility. But if worry truly solved problems, the most anxious people would be the most peaceful. Instead, they are often the most exhausted. The Buddha observed this tendency long before modern psychology studied it. He saw that human beings frequently become trapped in places that do not exist. Some spend their lives chasing the past. Others spend their lives chasing the future. Very few remain fully present with what is here. This is why one of the most profound themes throughout Buddhist teaching is the invitation to return to the present moment. Not because the future does not matter, but because the future cannot be lived. It can be imagined. It can be planned for. It can be anticipated. But it cannot be lived. Life only happens here. The future is always arriving as a present moment. Think about every meaningful experience you have ever had. Every act of love happened in the present moment. Every friendship grew in the present moment. Every lesson was learned in the present moment. Every sunset, every conversation, every act of kindness, every moment of joy, every moment of healing occurred in the present moment. Even the future you worry about will eventually arrive as another present moment. Yet the mind often behaves as though life is waiting somewhere else. It says, "I will relax when things become more certain. I will be happy when I solve this problem. I will enjoy life when I reach that goal. I will feel safe when I know what will happen." But certainty rarely arrives in the way we expect. One concern disappears and another emerges. One milestone is reached and another appears. One problem is solved and another takes its place. The horizon keeps moving. The future keeps expanding. And the person continues postponing peace. There is an old story about a farmer named Samuel who lived in a fertile valley surrounded by hills. He worked hard and cared deeply about his land. His crops were healthy. His family loved him. By most measures, he had a good life. Yet he rarely enjoyed it because he was constantly worried about what might happen next. If dark clouds appeared, he worried about storms. If the sky remained clear for too long, he worried about drought. If rain arrived, he feared flooding. If rain did not arrive, he feared losing the harvest. No matter what happened, his attention immediately moved toward the next possible problem. One spring morning, he stood beside his fields, speaking with an older farmer named Elias. The sky was blue. The air was fresh. The wheat moved gently in the wind. Birds crossed overhead. Everything around them seemed peaceful. Yet Samuel looked troubled. "A storm could come," he said. Elias nodded. It could. It could destroy the crops. It could. Samuel looked confused. "How are you not worried?" The older farmer smiled and glanced across the valley. "Because there is no storm right now." Samuel frowned. "But there might be. There might be. And if it comes, then I'll meet it when it arrives." Samuel shook his head. "I need to think ahead." Elias nodded thoughtfully. Thinking ahead is useful. Living ahead is different. Samuel remained silent. The older farmer pointed toward the fields. "Look carefully." "What do you see?" Samuel looked around. "The wheat. The trees. The sky. The sunlight." Elias nodded. "Exactly. All of that is here. Yet your mind is somewhere else." The words unsettled him. Over the following months, Samuel began noticing something he had never seen before. His body was almost always in one place, while his mind was in another. During dinner with his family, he worried about next season. While walking through healthy fields, he imagined crop failure. While sitting beneath a clear sky, he mentally stood inside a storm. Again and again, he discovered the same pattern. Life was offering him one reality, while his mind was occupied with another. Years later, Samuel would describe that realization as a turning point in his life. He eventually understood that the greatest storms he faced were not always the ones that came from the sky. Many of them existed only inside his imagination. The real storms came occasionally. The imagined storms arrived every day. And little by little, he began wondering something he had never questioned before. If so much suffering comes from living in futures that have not arrived, what becomes possible when a person finally learns how to return to the life that is already here? If so much suffering comes from living in futures that have not arrived, what becomes possible when a person finally learns how to return to the life that is already here? This question stayed with Samuel long after the growing season ended. It followed him through the harvest, through the winter months, and into the following spring. At first, he did not know how to answer it. He only knew that the old way of living was exhausting. He was tired of sacrificing peaceful days to imagined disasters. He was tired of standing in sunlight while mentally living beneath storm clouds. Most of all, he was tired of missing his own life. Around the same time, far away in a mountain monastery, there lived a young archer named Kenji. Before entering the monastery, he had been known for his extraordinary talent. He could strike targets at remarkable distances. His concentration was admired by everyone who watched him. Yet, after beginning his Zen training, something unexpected happened. His skills seemed to disappear. Day after day, he missed targets he once would have struck with ease. The harder he tried, the worse he performed. Frustration slowly consumed him. One morning, he approached an elderly Zen master named Hakuin. "Master, I don't understand," he said. "I practice more than ever, yet my arrows keep missing. What am I doing wrong?" The old master looked at him for a long moment before asking a simple question. "Where is your mind when you release the arrow?" Kenji frowned. "On the target." The master shook his head. "No. It is on the future." Kenji looked confused. Hakuin continued. "You are not shooting the arrow. You are already thinking about whether you will succeed or fail. You are already imagining the result. Your body stands here, but your mind has already traveled ahead." The young archer remained silent. The master handed him a bow and pointed toward a target. "Shoot again." Kenji drew the bowstring. Immediately, thoughts appeared. What if I miss? What if I disappoint my teacher? What if I never regain my skill? Before the arrow even left the bow, he was already living in the future. The shot missed. Hakuin nodded. Again. This continued for weeks. Slowly, the young archer began noticing something. His greatest obstacle was not poor technique. It was his inability to remain where he was. Every shot became a conversation with the future. Every action became tangled with imagined outcomes. Finally, one quiet morning, something changed. As he stood before the target, he stopped thinking about success. He stopped thinking about failure. He stopped imagining what others would think. He simply felt the bow in his hands. He felt the ground beneath his feet. He felt his breath moving through his body. For the first time, he was completely present. The arrow left the string. It struck the center of the target. Hakuin smiled. You see, the target was never the problem. You were trying to live in the result instead of the moment. Perhaps many people do something similar with life itself. They become so focused on outcomes that they stop experiencing the process. They become so concerned with where they are going that they lose contact with where they are. They become so occupied with what might happen tomorrow that they fail to notice what is happening today. Yet peace rarely appears in the future. Peace appears in moments of presence. It appears when the mind stops running ahead and settles into what is already here. The strange thing about anxiety is that it promises safety, but often steals it. It tells us that if we keep thinking about tomorrow, we will finally feel secure. Yet the more we live in tomorrow, the less secure we feel. The future remains uncertain no matter how many times we visit it mentally. The only thing that changes is the amount of life we miss while worrying about it. Many people spend years preparing for future happiness while overlooking present happiness. They prepare for future peace while abandoning present peace. They prepare for future living while forgetting to live. When we stop living inside tomorrow, something remarkable begins to happen. Life becomes visible again. We notice things we have not seen in years. We notice the warmth of morning sunlight on a wall. We notice the taste of a simple meal. We notice the sound of rain against a window. We notice the people sitting beside us. We notice the ordinary moments that quietly make up a human life. Nothing dramatic changes. The world remains imperfect. Problems still exist. Uncertainty still exists. Yet our relationship to life begins to soften. We no longer experience every moment as preparation for some future event. We begin allowing moments to be complete in themselves. This is one of the reasons mindfulness has remained at the heart of Buddhist practice for centuries. Mindfulness is not about emptying the mind. It is not about achieving a special state. It is simply the art of returning. Returning from tomorrow. Returning from yesterday. Returning from imagined scenarios. Returning from mental noise. Returning to direct experience. Returning to life. If you have ever watched a child become completely absorbed in a simple activity, you have witnessed this quality. A child watching waves reach the shore. A child chasing butterflies through a field. A child drawing with complete concentration. For those moments, there is no future to solve. There is only experience. As adults, we often lose this ability. We become experts at leaving the present. Yet the capacity never disappears completely. It waits patiently beneath the noise. Perhaps this evening you might experiment with something very simple. There is nothing complicated about it. No special belief is required. No perfect concentration is required. Simply notice your breath. Not the breath you will take tomorrow. Not the breath you took yesterday. This breath. Feel the air entering your body. Feel the air leaving. Notice the rise and fall of your chest. Notice the weight of your body being supported. Notice the sounds around you. Notice the space you are occupying right now. If thoughts about the future appear, that is okay. The goal is not to fight them. The goal is simply to notice them and gently return. Again and again. A thought appears. Return. A worry appears. Return. A prediction appears. Return. Not because the future is unimportant, but because it is not where you are. You are here. Many people spend their lives waiting for a future version of themselves to finally arrive. A calme version. A happier version. A more successful version. A version who has solved every problem and removed every uncertainty. Yet that person remains forever on the horizon. What if peace does not belong to that future version of you? What if peace is available only to the person who is breathing right now? What if the life you have been waiting to enjoy is already unfolding around you? These questions can feel unsettling because they challenge a habit that many people have carried for years. But they can also feel liberating. They remind us that life is not hidden in some distant future. Life is already happening. The Buddha's invitation is surprisingly simple. Do not lose yourself in the future. Not because the future does not matter, but because your life matters too much to miss it. There will always be another uncertainty. There will always be another possibility to worry about. There will always be another horizon. But there will never be another version of this exact moment. This breath will never happen again. This evening will never happen again. This stage of your life will never happen again. And perhaps that realization is not meant to create fear. Perhaps it is meant to create appreciation. As the night becomes quieter, there may still be unanswered questions in your life. There may still be uncertainties. There may still be things you do not know. That is part of being human. The goal is not to eliminate uncertainty before sleeping. The goal is to stop demanding certainty before allowing yourself to rest. The future can wait until morning. The problems of tomorrow can remain in tomorrow. You do not have to carry them all right now. You do not have to solve every possibility before closing your eyes. You do not have to live 100 imagined lives before finishing this one day. The breath is here. The body is here. The present moment is here. And perhaps, after wandering through so many futures, it is finally time to come home. Not home to a place, but home to this moment. Home to this breath. Home to this life that has been patiently waiting for your attention all along. If this reflection spoke to your heart, share in the comments one thing you are learning to let go of. And if you'd like more peaceful Buddhist wisdom before sleep, consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who may need it tonight. There is a particular kind of disappointment that almost every human being experiences at some point in life. It is not the disappointment of failure itself. It is the disappointment of effort that seems to produce no visible result. A person works hard and sees no progress. Someone tries to heal but continues feeling pain. A parent gives love and patience, yet sees little change. A student studies diligently, but does not immediately succeed. An entrepreneur spends years building something that appears to go nowhere. Again and again, people encounter the same painful question. If I am doing the right things, why am I not seeing the results I expected? This question has troubled human beings for thousands of years because we naturally want to see a clear connection between effort and reward. We plant a seed and want fruit tomorrow. We begin a journey and want to arrive immediately. We make a good decision and expect life to respond right away. Yet reality rarely moves according to our preferred schedule. Much of the frustration people carry comes from this gap between action and outcome. We often believe that if we do the right thing, the right result should appear quickly. When it does not, discouragement begins to grow. The mind starts asking difficult questions. Is this working? Am I wasting my time? Should I give up? Why do other people seem to succeed more easily? Why am I trying so hard if nothing is changing? These questions can become especially heavy during difficult periods of life. A person may be making healthy choices every day and still struggle. Someone may be practicing patience while receiving little appreciation. Someone may be acting with kindness while encountering unkindness in return. Eventually, the temptation arises to judge the value of an action solely by its immediate outcome. The Buddha offered a very different way of understanding life. He taught that much suffering comes from confusing what belongs to us with what does not belong to us. We tend to believe that because we can control our actions, we should also be able to control the results of those actions. Yet the world does not function that way. We influence outcomes, but we do not own them. We participate in causes, but countless other conditions contribute to effects. This is one of the deepest meanings hidden within the teaching of karma. In many cultures, karma is often misunderstood as a system of rewards and punishments, as though the universe were keeping score and distributing prizes or penalties. But the Buddha's teaching is much more subtle than that. Karma is fundamentally about cause and effect. Every action plants a seed. Every thought, every word, every choice contributes something to the conditions from which future experiences emerge. Yet planting a seed is not the same thing as controlling the entire harvest. Imagine a gardener standing in a field. The gardener can prepare the soil. The gardener can plant carefully. The gardener can water consistently. The gardener can remove weeds and protect young plants. All of these things are within the gardener's influence. But the gardener cannot command the rain. The gardener cannot control the seasons. The gardener cannot force a seed to grow faster than nature allows. The gardener participates in the process, but does not own the outcome completely. Life often works in the same way. We control our intentions, our efforts, our attitudes, and our actions. Beyond that, countless factors interact in ways we cannot fully predict. This understanding can be surprisingly liberating. Many people spend enormous amounts of energy worrying about outcomes they cannot control. They constantly evaluate themselves according to results. If success arrives, they feel worthy. If success is delayed, they feel inadequate. Their peace depends entirely upon external circumstances. Yet the Buddha pointed attention towards something more stable. Instead of obsessing over the fruit, focus on the seed. Instead of measuring your worth by results, pay attention to the quality of your actions. Instead of demanding immediate outcomes, learn to trust the process of planting. Consider how different life feels when viewed through this lens. A person practicing kindness no longer needs immediate appreciation in order for the kindness to have value. A person caring for their health no longer needs instant transformation for their effort to matter. A person working toward a meaningful goal can recognize that progress is often invisible long before it becomes visible. The value of an action is not determined solely by what happens next. The value of an action also lies in the quality of the action itself. Many of the most important things in life develop slowly. Trust develops slowly. Wisdom develops slowly. Healing develops slowly. Character develops slowly. Relationships deepen slowly. Yet modern life often trains people to expect instant feedback. Press a button and receive a response. Make a purchase and receive delivery. Search for information and receive answers within seconds. This creates an unconscious expectation that everything meaningful should happen quickly. When life refuses to operate according to this pace, frustration emerges. The Buddha's teaching gently reminds us that growth follows its own rhythm. Some changes happen quickly. Others require time beneath the surface. In fact, some of the most important transformations remain invisible for long periods before becoming visible at all. There is a story often told among gardeners about a particular species of bamboo. A young landscape architect named Michael became fascinated by this plant after hearing about its unusual growth pattern. Curious, he purchased several seeds and planted them in a small section of land behind his home. He prepared the soil carefully. He watered consistently. He followed every recommendation he could find. Weeks passed. Nothing appeared. Months passed. Still nothing. Michael remained patient. He continued watering. He continued caring for the soil. Friends occasionally asked how the bamboo was doing. "It hasn't appeared yet," he would answer. A year passed. Nothing. A second year passed. Still nothing visible above the ground. People began laughing at the project. One neighbor joked, "You're the only gardener I know who spends years watering empty dirt." Michael laughed politely, but privately he began doubting himself. Had he made a mistake? Had the seeds died? Was he wasting his effort? Yet something encouraged him to continue. So he watered, and waited, and trusted. A third year passed. Still nothing. A fourth year passed. Still no visible bamboo. By now, almost everyone believed the experiment had failed. Then, sometime during the fifth year, something remarkable happened. A small shoot finally emerged from the soil. At first, it seemed insignificant. Just a thin green stalk pushing through the earth. But within weeks, it began growing rapidly. Within months, it reached heights that seemed impossible. The growth accelerated so dramatically that visitors could hardly believe what they were seeing. The plant that had appeared absent for years suddenly towered above the landscape. One evening, Michael sat beneath the bamboo and reflected on the experience. What fascinated him most was not how quickly the bamboo grew during the fifth year. What fascinated him was what had been happening during the previous 4 years. The plant had not been inactive. It had been developing an extensive root system underground. Long before visible growth appeared, invisible growth was already taking place. The years of waiting were not empty years. They were foundational years. The roots were preparing for the height that would eventually come. Human growth often follows a similar pattern. A person practices patience for years before noticing how much calmer they have become. Someone attends therapy for months before realizing old wounds no longer control them. A student struggles through years of learning before mastery begins to emerge. A parent invests thousands of small acts of care long before seeing the full impact on a child's life. Much of the most important growth happens beneath the surface. Unfortunately, The human mind often evaluates progress only by what is visible. We look for immediate evidence, immediate results, immediate rewards. When they do not appear, discouragement begins whispering that nothing is happening. Yet life is frequently doing its most important work underground. Michael eventually understood that his years of watering had never been wasted. The roots were growing even when his eyes could not see them. The same may be true for many aspects of your own life. The kindness you practice, the habits you cultivate, the healing you pursue, the patience you develop, the wisdom you seek. Not all growth announces itself immediately. Some growth spends a long time preparing beneath the surface before revealing itself. This realization raises an important question. If so much of life develops invisibly, if the most important roots often grow where we cannot see them, then what changes when we stop measuring our lives only by immediate results and begin trusting the seeds we are planting today? If so much of life develops invisibly, if the most important roots often grow where we cannot see them, then what changes when we stop measuring our lives only by immediate results and begin trusting the seeds we are planting today? This question brings us to another old parable, one that has been told in different forms across generations because it speaks directly to the impatience that so many people carry. There was once a farmer named Thomas who lived on a stretch of land at the edge of a dry valley. The soil was difficult. Rain was unpredictable. The growing season was shorter than in neighboring regions. Yet every spring, Thomas walked into his fields before sunrise, carrying buckets of water and bags of seed. Year after year he planted. Year after year he watered. And year after year, the results seemed painfully small. His neighbors often questioned his persistence. Some suggested that he sell the land and move elsewhere. Others advised him to stop wasting energy on soil that appeared unwilling to reward his effort. Even Thomas occasionally wondered whether they were right. There were mornings when he looked across the empty fields and felt discouraged. The earth appeared unchanged. The rows seemed barren. Nothing visible suggested that his labor mattered. One evening, after a particularly difficult season, he sat outside his farmhouse, watching the sun disappear beyond the hills. An older woman named Margaret, who had lived in the valley her entire life, happened to pass by. Seeing the disappointment on his face, she stopped and sat beside him. After a few moments of silence, she asked, "How long have you been watering these fields?" Thomas sighed. "Years." Margaret nodded. "And how long have you been expecting immediate proof that your work is worthwhile?" He looked at her, uncertain how to answer. She smiled gently. "The earth is doing many things you cannot see." The words stayed with him. They did not instantly remove his frustration, but they planted something new inside his mind. The next morning he returned to the fields. Not because he suddenly felt certain, not because he had guarantees, but because he realized that meaningful work often begins long before meaningful results appear. This is one of the most difficult lessons in life. Human beings naturally want evidence. We want signs that our effort matters. We want reassurance that we are moving in the right direction. We want confirmation that the kindness we offer, the discipline we practice, the healing we pursue, and the sacrifices we make are leading somewhere. Yet life rarely reveals its full process. We are often shown only a small portion of the picture. The roots remain hidden. The conditions remain hidden. the slow transformations occurring beneath the surface remain hidden. Because of this, many people abandon good seeds before they have time to grow. They stop being patient because patience does not seem to be working. They stop being kind because kindness does not appear to be rewarded. They stop believing in gradual change because gradual change feels too slow. Yet, the Buddha's teaching on karma points in a different direction. Karma invites us to focus on causes rather than outcomes. It reminds us that our responsibility is not to force fruit into existence. Our responsibility is to plant wisely, nurture carefully, and trust the natural unfolding of causes and conditions. When people hear the word trust, they sometimes imagine passive waiting. But this is not the trust the Buddha pointed toward. It is not a trust that sits still and hopes for miracles. It is a trust rooted in participation. A gardener still waters. A musician still practices. A therapist still shows up for clients. A parent still offers love. A student still studies. Trust does not remove effort. Trust removes the desperate demand for immediate results. There is an enormous difference. One creates steadiness. The other creates anxiety. One allows action to flow naturally. The other constantly asks, "Is it working yet?" Imagine trying to grow a flower while digging it up every day to inspect the roots. The very impatience that seeks proof ends up disturbing the process itself. Many people treat their lives this way. They constantly evaluate, compare, measure, and judge every stage of growth. As a result, they rarely experience the quiet confidence that comes from simply continuing the work. The Buddha understood that attachment to results often creates suffering because results belong partly to forces beyond our control. We can influence them, but we cannot command them. We can offer effort, but we cannot guarantee outcomes. We can plant seeds, but we cannot dictate exactly when fruit will appear. This realization may initially sound unsettling, yet it can also be profoundly freeing. If outcomes are not fully ours to control, then our value as human beings cannot depend entirely upon outcomes. A person is not worthless because success is delayed. A person is not failing because visible results have not yet arrived. Sometimes the most important work of a life is happening in places no one can see, including the person doing the work. Think about all the invisible forms of growth that occur within a human being. Compassion develops quietly. Wisdom develops quietly. Resilience develops quietly. Emotional healing develops quietly. Character develops quietly. Most people cannot point to a single day when they suddenly became wiser. Growth rarely announces itself. It accumulates gradually through thousands of small moments. A difficult conversation handled differently than before. A reaction softened by awareness. A little more patience. A little more understanding. A little more courage. These changes may seem small individually, yet over time, they transform an entire life. The challenge is that while these roots are growing, the mind often insists on staring at the surface and asking why nothing appears different. Perhaps this is why so many people feel tired. They are not only carrying responsibilities, they are carrying the burden of constantly demanding proof from life. They want guarantees that their efforts will pay off. They want certainty that their healing is working. They want immediate evidence that their kindness matters. Yet much of life unfolds according to rhythms that cannot be rushed. The sunrise arrives when it arrives. Spring follows winter in its own time. Seeds germinate according to conditions, not according to impatience. Human transformation follows a similar pattern. As the evening becomes quieter, consider how different life feels when attention shifts from fruits to seeds. Instead of asking, "What am I getting?" the question becomes, "What am I planting?" Instead of asking, "How quickly is this changing?" the question becomes, "Am I nurturing the right causes?" This subtle shift changes everything. It brings attention back to what is actually within your influence. Your intentions, your actions, your effort, your character, your presence. These things belong to you. They are available in every moment. Outcomes remain uncertain, but the quality of the seed you plant right now is entirely within reach. Perhaps before sleep, there is value in planting one small good seed. Not a dramatic act, not a life-changing achievement, just something simple. Maybe it is offering yourself forgiveness for a mistake you have carried too long. Maybe it is expressing gratitude for one thing that supported you today. Maybe it is sending a silent wish of well-being to someone you care about. Maybe it is making a quiet commitment to begin again tomorrow. Small seeds often appear insignificant, yet entire forests begin this way. Entire lives change this way. The Buddha frequently emphasized small, repeated actions because he understood that destiny is often shaped not by extraordinary moments, but by ordinary habits practiced consistently. If you choose to reflect for a moment before sleep, you might ask yourself a gentle question. What seed did I plant today? Not what fruit appeared. Not what reward arrived. Simply what seed was planted. Did you practice patience? Did you show kindness? Did you act with honesty? Did you continue despite discouragement? Did you care for yourself when life felt difficult? Whatever the answer, acknowledge it. A seed planted today may not reveal itself tomorrow. It may not reveal itself next month. But causes have a way of continuing their work long after we stop watching. The farmer Thomas eventually learned this. Years after his conversation with Margaret, people began noticing changes across his land. The soil had become richer. The harvests became stronger. The fields that once appeared empty slowly transformed. Visitors praised the beauty of the farm and admired his success. Yet when people asked how he achieved it, he rarely spoke about the harvest. Instead, he spoke about the years when nothing seemed to be happening. He spoke about the mornings when he watered soil that appeared unchanged. He spoke about learning to trust effort before results arrived. He understood something many people never fully learn. The harvest is only the visible part of a much longer story. And perhaps the same is true for your life. There may be areas where growth feels slow. There may be efforts that seem unnoticed. There may be seeds whose fruit has not yet appeared. That does not mean nothing is happening. It may simply mean the roots are still growing. It may mean life is working beneath the surface. It may mean tomorrow is preparing something that cannot yet be seen. So as this day comes to an end, there is no need to force the harvest. There is no need to rush the season. There is no need to pull at the roots to make them grow faster. The seed has been planted. The work of today is complete. Tomorrow will unfold according to its own conditions, its own timing, and its own pace. For now, let tomorrow grow at its own speed. Let the roots continue their hidden work. Let the earth hold what you cannot control. And allow yourself, just for this moment, to appreciate the quiet dignity of having planted a good seed. There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep alone cannot cure. It is not the exhaustion that comes from physical work, nor the tiredness that follows a long day. It is the fatigue that comes from carrying too much responsibility for things that were never fully ours to carry in the first place. Many people live with this burden for so long that they no longer recognize it. They wake up thinking about what might go wrong. They spend their days trying to anticipate every possibility, prevent every mistake, manage every outcome, and protect themselves from every uncertainty. They monitor conversations, relationships, finances, health, careers, and the opinions of other people. Their minds are constantly working, constantly calculating, constantly preparing. From the outside, it may appear as though they are simply being responsible. Yet internally, they are fighting a battle that cannot be won. The battle is not against life itself. The battle is against uncertainty. And uncertainty has always been part of being human. Many people believe their stress comes from circumstances. They think the problem is the difficult job, the uncertain future, the complicated relationship, or the unanswered question. Sometimes those things certainly contribute to suffering. But often there is something deeper taking place. Beneath the visible problem lies an invisible struggle. The mind is not only experiencing life, it is trying to control life. It is trying to guarantee outcomes. It is trying to create certainty where certainty does not exist. It is trying to hold tightly to things that naturally move and change. Over time, this effort becomes exhausting because it requires constant vigilance. The mind never truly rests. Even during peaceful moments, it remains alert, scanning for potential problems. Even when nothing is wrong, it prepares for what might go wrong next. Imagine holding a rope attached to a large boat drifting on a river. At first, holding the rope may not seem difficult. But hour after hour, day after day, the effort grows heavier. The current pulls. The muscles tighten. Energy is consumed. Eventually, exhaustion becomes unavoidable. Yet many people never ask an important question. What would happen if they stopped pulling? What would happen if they loosened their grip? The assumption is often that everything would fall apart. The assumption is that letting go would lead to chaos. Yet sometimes, the very thing creating suffering is not the river, but the endless effort to control its movement. The Buddha spoke frequently about attachment, though the word attachment is sometimes misunderstood. Many people hear it and assume it means not caring, not loving, or becoming emotionally distant. But that is not what the Buddha was pointing toward. Attachment is not love. Attachment is the insistence that life must unfold according to our preferences in order for us to be at peace. It is the belief that happiness depends upon controlling circumstances. It is the belief that security comes from holding tightly. Non-attachment, therefore, is not indifference. It is freedom. It is the ability to participate fully in life without demanding ownership of everything that happens. Consider a person holding sand in an open hand. The sand remains comfortably in place. There is no struggle. Now, imagine closing the hand into a tight fist. The harder the person squeezes, the more sand slips through their fingers. Much of life works in a similar way. Relationships, achievements, health, reputation, youth, and even our plans for the future all possess an element of impermanence. The more desperately we try to possess them, the more tension we create. The more tightly we grasp, the more afraid we become of losing what we hold. The fear itself becomes a source of suffering. The Buddha observed that grasping often creates more pain than the changing nature of life itself. We become attached to outcomes. We become attached to identities. We become attached to expectations. Then, reality inevitably moves in a different direction, and we feel betrayed. Yet reality was never making promises. Life was simply being life. Seasons change. Circumstances change. People change. Bodies change. Plans change. The problem is not that change exists. The problem is that we often demand permanence from an impermanent world. One of the paradoxes of Buddhist wisdom is that letting go often creates more energy, not less. At first, this sounds counterintuitive. Most people assume that control creates strength. They believe that if they remain vigilant enough, careful enough, and determined enough, they will maintain stability. Yet control consumes tremendous energy. It requires constant monitoring, constant résistance, constant mental activity. Letting go, by contrast, allows energy to return. Think about how much energy is spent worrying about what other people think. How much energy is spent replaying conversations? How much energy is spent trying to predict the future? How much energy is spent resisting reality? When these struggles soften, even slightly, something remarkable happens. The mind becomes quieter. The body becomes less tense. Attention becomes available again. Energy that was trapped in control becomes available for living. A person who stops trying to control every outcome can finally focus on the quality of their actions. A person who stops trying to force certainty can finally appreciate what is here. A person who stops fighting reality can finally begin cooperating with it. This is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is not giving up. It is simply the recognition that some things belong within our influence and some things do not. There is an old monastery story about a young monk named Sora who struggled deeply with this lesson. Sora entered monastic life with sincere intentions. He wanted wisdom. He wanted peace. He wanted freedom from suffering. Yet despite years of practice, he remained frustrated. His mind was constantly busy. He worried about becoming enlightened. He worried about whether he was meditating correctly. He worried about making mistakes. He worried about disappointing his teacher. Even his spiritual practice became another attempt to control outcomes. One afternoon, his teacher, an elderly monk named Ryuen, noticed him sitting beside a river with a troubled expression. "What is troubling you?" Ryuen asked. Sora hesitated. "I am trying very hard," he said. "But peace never stays. Every time I think I understand something, confusion returns." The old monk sat beside him quietly. After a few moments, he pointed toward a thick rope tied around a wooden post near the riverbank. "Do you see that rope?" he asked. "Yes." "Take hold of it." Sora obeyed. "Now pull." The young monk pulled. The rope resisted. Harder. He pulled again. His muscles tightened. His breathing became strained. Minutes passed. Finally, Sora asked, "Master, what is the purpose of this?" Ryan smiled. "Keep holding." More time passed. The rope dug into Sora's hands. His arms grew tired. His shoulders ached. At last he said, "I cannot do this much longer." The old monk nodded, then let go. Sora released the rope immediately. Relief rushed through his body. His muscles softened. His breathing slowed. The tension disappeared almost instantly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ryuan asked quietly, "Tell me, what was exhausting you?" Sora looked at the rope. The rope. The old monk shook his head. No. The rope was simply there. What exhausted you was holding it. Sora stared at the river. Something inside him became very still. As the current moved steadily past them, he began wondering how many invisible ropes he had been gripping throughout his life. How many fears? How many expectations? How many outcomes? How many struggles? And for the first time, a different question began to emerge within him. If so much of his suffering came not from life itself, but from his grip on life, what might happen if he learned how to loosen his hold? If so much of suffering comes not from life itself, but from our grip on life, what happens when that grip begins to loosen? This question stayed with Sora long after he left the riverbank. In the months that followed, he noticed something surprising. The things exhausting him were often not the circumstances he faced, but the constant effort to manage those circumstances. Every time he tried to force certainty, tension appeared. Every time he demanded guarantees, anxiety followed. Every time he insisted that life unfold according to his expectations, frustration emerged. Slowly, he began understanding what his teacher had been pointing toward. The rope had never been the problem. The holding had been the problem. And although this insight emerged in a monastery, it is not limited to monks. It belongs just as much to ordinary people living ordinary lives. There was once a businessman named David who seemed successful by every conventional measure. He had built a thriving company, owned a beautiful home, and earned the respect of colleagues throughout his industry. Yet beneath the surface, he lived with a level of stress that few people understood. Every morning began with checking messages. Every meal was interrupted by work. Every vacation became an opportunity to monitor projects from a distance. His mind was always occupied with the next problem, the next risk, the next challenge. Employees admired his dedication, but those closest to him saw something different. They saw a man who never truly relaxed. Even when nothing was wrong, he searched for potential threats. Even when things were going well, he worried about what might go wrong next. One evening, his daughter asked him a simple question. "Dad, when are you done working?" David smiled. "Soon." She nodded. "You always say that." The conversation stayed with him. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. He had spent years believing that rest would come later. After the next milestone, after the next project, after the next challenge. Yet, each accomplishment simply created another responsibility. Every solved problem revealed another problem waiting behind it. Every success generated a new goal. Without realizing it, he had built his entire life around the assumption that peace would arrive in the future. Several months later, after experiencing a period of severe burnout, David reluctantly agreed to spend a weekend at a mindfulness retreat recommended by a friend. He expected little from the experience. In fact, he spent most of the first day mentally criticizing it. The pace felt too slow. The silence felt uncomfortable. The lack of productivity made him restless. On the second afternoon, however, something unexpected happened. During a walking meditation, he found himself standing beneath a large oak tree. There was nothing particularly remarkable about the moment. No dramatic insight. No mystical experience. Just a tree moving gently in the wind. For reasons he could not explain, he stood there longer than usual. Then a strange thought entered his mind. The tree was not trying to become tomorrow's tree. It was simply being today's tree. The observation sounded almost ridiculous. Yet something about it stayed with him. He began noticing how completely different nature seemed from the way he lived. Trees did not rush. Rivers did not obsess about where they would be next year. Birds did not spend entire afternoons rehearsing future disasters. Life participated in itself without constantly trying to control every outcome. Later that evening, David spoke with one of the retreat teachers. "I feel like I'm carrying something heavy all the time," he admitted. The teacher nodded. "What is it?" David thought for a moment. "I don't know." The teacher smiled gently. "Then perhaps it isn't one thing." "What do you mean?" "Perhaps you're carrying responsibility for things that were never yours to carry." The words landed more deeply than David expected. For years, he had been carrying the future. He had been carrying the opinions of other people. He had been carrying outcomes. He had been carrying uncertainty. He had been carrying possibilities. He had been carrying problems that did not yet exist. Most importantly, he had been carrying the belief that everything depended entirely upon him. That realization did not instantly transform his life. Real transformation rarely happens that way. But it marked the beginning of something important. He gradually learned that responsibility and control are not the same thing. Responsibility means showing up fully for what is yours to do. Control means trying to manage everything beyond that. Responsibility creates dignity. Control often creates exhaustion. This distinction is one of the most liberating insights within Buddhist wisdom. Many people spend years trying to control outcomes when what truly matters are their actions. They try to control whether others approve of them, rather than focusing on whether they are acting with integrity. They try to control future results, rather than present effort. They try to control uncertainty, rather than developing the capacity to meet uncertainty with wisdom. The Buddha's teaching of non-attachment is not about withdrawing from life. It is about participating without clinging. It is about caring deeply without becoming imprisoned by outcomes. It is about acting wholeheartedly while accepting that not everything can be controlled. When people first hear this idea, they sometimes worry that letting go will make them passive. They imagine that releasing control means becoming indifferent or careless. Yet the opposite is often true. Letting go creates energy. Control consumes energy. Think about how much emotional energy is spent trying to change the past. Think about how much energy is spent predicting the future. Think about how much energy is spent worrying about what others think. Think about how much energy is spent resisting reality. When those struggles begin to soften, energy becomes available again. Energy for creativity. Energy for relationships. Energy for healing. Energy for presence. Energy for life itself. Many people discover that peace does not arrive because life becomes easier. Peace arrives because they stop fighting every aspect of life. Imagine swimming against a river for hours. The current never stops. Every movement requires effort. Every moment feels like a battle. Then imagine turning around and allowing the current to support you. The river remains exactly the same. What changes is your relationship to it. Life often works in a similar way. The circumstances may not change immediately. The uncertainties may remain. The questions may remain unanswered. Yet the struggle softens. And when the struggle softens, peace has room to enter. Perhaps this evening there is one burden you have been carrying for a long time. Not all of them. Just one. Perhaps it is a future outcome you keep trying to control. Perhaps it is another person's opinion. Perhaps it is a problem you cannot solve tonight. Perhaps it is a question without an answer. Perhaps it is a responsibility that has quietly expanded far beyond what actually belongs to you. There is no need to force yourself to release it completely. Sometimes letting go happens gradually. Sometimes it begins with nothing more than awareness. Simply noticing. Simply recognizing. Simply admitting, I have been carrying this. Then asking a gentle question. Does this burden truly belong in my hands right now? Notice that the question is not whether the issue matters. The question is whether carrying it in this moment is helping. Many burdens remain heavy because we never stop to examine them. We assume that because something concerns us, we must hold it continuously. Yet concern and constant carrying are not the same thing. A gardener does not dig up seeds every evening. A sailor cannot control the wind. A parent cannot live a child's life for them. A business owner cannot eliminate all uncertainty. A human being cannot control every outcome. At some point, wisdom begins where control ends. As the day slowly comes to a close, consider the possibility that peace is not something you must create through effort. Perhaps peace is already waiting beneath the effort. Like a clear lake hidden beneath ripples, it becomes visible when the constant struggle begins to settle. The mind does not need to solve every problem before peace can appear. The future does not need to become certain. Life does not need to become perfect. Sometimes peace arrives in a quieter way. It arrives when we stop gripping. It arrives when we stop demanding. It arrives when we stop trying to carry the entire world on our shoulders. The rope remains where it is. The river continues flowing. Life continues unfolding. Yet something within us changes. And in that softening, in that willingness to loosen our hold just a little, we begin discovering a truth that many people spend years searching for. Peace is often not something we achieve. It is something that finally has space to enter when we stop blocking the door. There is a quiet tragedy that many people never notice while it is happening. They spend so much time trying to manage life that they forget to experience it. They spend so much energy protecting themselves from disappointment that they miss moments of joy. They become so focused on controlling outcomes that they lose contact with the simple beauty unfolding around them. Years later, when they look back, they often realize that some of the most meaningful parts of life passed almost unnoticed. The conversation they rushed through, the sunset they barely looked at, the friend they were physically present with but mentally absent from, the ordinary afternoon they assumed would happen again forever. Human beings often imagine that suffering comes only from what they lose. Yet sometimes suffering comes from what they fail to fully receive while it is still here. Many people live as though life is a problem to solve rather than an experience to inhabit. They move from one concern to another, one goal to another, one responsibility to another. Even during moments that should feel peaceful, the mind remains occupied elsewhere. Someone sits with their family while thinking about work. Someone achieves a long-awaited goal and immediately begins worrying about the next one. Someone takes a walk through a beautiful park while mentally replaying unfinished tasks. The body remains in the present, but attention is somewhere else. As a result, life becomes something observed through a fog of thoughts rather than something directly lived. This is one of the hidden costs of trying to control everything. Control often promises security, but it quietly steals presence. The more tightly we grip life, the less we actually experience it. We become like travelers who spend an entire journey staring at maps while missing the landscape around them. The irony is that many people pursue control because they want happiness. Yet the pursuit itself often pulls them away from the very happiness they seek. The Buddha understood something profound about this tendency. He taught a quality known as equanimity, one of the most beautiful and misunderstood aspects of Buddhist wisdom. Equanimity does not mean becoming emotionally cold. It does not mean suppressing feelings or pretending that difficult experiences do not matter. Equanimity means developing a stable heart in an unstable world. It means learning how to remain balanced amid gain and loss, praise and criticism, success and failure, certainty and uncertainty. Imagine standing beside the ocean. Waves rise and fall continuously. Some are gentle. Some are powerful. Yet beneath the surface, the deeper water remains relatively calm. Equanimity is like that deeper water. It is the ability to remain grounded even when the surface conditions of life are constantly changing. Most people search for peace by trying to control the waves. Equanimity teaches us to develop depth instead. This wisdom becomes especially important because life will never stop changing. Circumstances will shift. People will come and go. Plans will succeed and fail. Bodies will age. Emotions will rise and fall. If our happiness depends entirely on controlling these movements, peace will always remain fragile. There will always be another condition to manage, another uncertainty to solve, another outcome to secure. But if happiness begins to arise from a deeper relationship with life itself, something changes. We stop needing perfect circumstances in order to experience moments of joy. The Buddha repeatedly pointed toward this possibility. Genuine happiness does not come from possessing complete control. It comes from freedom. And freedom is often found not in holding tighter, but in loosening our grip. Many people spend years believing that happiness lies somewhere ahead. They imagine that once everything is organized, predictable, and secure, then they will finally relax. Yet life rarely becomes perfectly organized. The future rarely becomes perfectly predictable. security remains incomplete. If happiness depends upon these things, happiness remains postponed. But what if happiness is available in another way? What if it becomes available when we stop demanding certainty before allowing ourselves to live? What if joy grows in the space created by acceptance? What if peace emerges when we stop arguing with reality? Think about some of the happiest moments in your life. Chances are, many of them were not perfectly controlled. Perhaps they involved laughter that could not be planned. Perhaps they involved friendship, love, creativity, wonder, or connection. Often the most meaningful experiences arrive unexpectedly. They emerge when attention is fully present. They emerge when we are participating in life rather than trying to manage every aspect of it. This is why letting go often makes life richer rather than smaller. Many people fear that releasing control means losing something valuable. They imagine they will become passive or detached from what matters. Yet the opposite is frequently true. When the need to control begins to soften, appreciation becomes possible. Curiosity becomes possible. Gratitude becomes possible. Presence becomes possible. We start seeing life instead of merely managing it. There is a story about a gardener named Elena who loved flowers more than anything else in the world. Her garden occupied a large portion of her property and contained roses, lilies, tulips, sunflowers, and dozens of other varieties. Gardening was not simply a hobby for her. It was a passion. Every morning she walked among the flower beds, inspecting every stem and every leaf. She wanted the garden to be perfect. One spring she became particularly excited about a collection of rare flowers she had planted near the center of the garden. She had waited months for the seeds to arrive. She prepared the soil carefully. She watered consistently. She protected the area from pests and harsh weather. Yet after several weeks, she became impatient. The flowers seemed to be growing too slowly. Each morning, she examined them closely. "Why aren't you growing faster?" she would mutter. Days passed. The flowers continued developing at their natural pace. But Elena's impatience increased. Eventually, she came up with an idea. If growth was good, perhaps helping the flowers grow faster would be even better. So one morning, she gently grasped the stem of a young flower and pulled upward ever so slightly. The next day, she did the same thing. And the day after that. To her surprise, the flowers began looking weaker rather than stronger. Leaves wilted. Stems bent. Growth slowed. Confused and frustrated, Elena sought advice from an elderly gardener named Robert who lived nearby. After listening to her explanation, he smiled kindly. "You've been pulling the flowers, haven't you?" Elena looked embarrassed. "A little." Robert laughed softly. "The flowers know how to grow, but they are growing so slowly." "According to whom?" he asked. She remained silent. The old gardener knelt beside one of the plants. "You are trying to help life by forcing it. I just want them to flourish." "I know," he said gently. "But growth requires patience. A flower unfolds when it is ready. Pulling it does not make it bloom. It only damages the roots." The words stayed with her. Over the following weeks, she stopped interfering. She continued watering. She continued caring for the soil. But she no longer pulled. She no longer demanded. She no longer tried to accelerate a process that possessed its own wisdom. Slowly, the flowers recovered. Then they bloomed. And as she walked through the garden that summer, Elena began noticing something she had never fully understood before. The problem had never been the flowers. The problem had been her inability to trust the process. The story may seem simple, yet it mirrors something many people do with their own lives. They pull at relationships. They pull at careers. They pull at healing. They pull at personal growth. They pull at the future. They try to force outcomes before conditions are ready. They become frustrated when life refuses to move according to their timetable. Eventually, a realization begins to emerge. Some things flourish through control. Many of the most important things flourish through care, patience, and trust. The gardener's role is not to force the flower open. The gardener's role is to create conditions that support growth. Perhaps the same is true for us. Perhaps we are not responsible for forcing every outcome. Perhaps we are responsible for showing up with wisdom, kindness, effort, and patience. Perhaps life contains its own intelligence. And if that is true, then another question naturally arises. If so much beauty becomes visible when we stop pulling at the future and start trusting the process of growth, what changes inside us when we finally allow life to unfold instead of constantly trying to force it? If so much beauty becomes visible when we stop pulling at the future and start trusting the process of growth, what changes inside us when we finally allow life to unfold instead of constantly trying to force it? For Elena, the gardener, the answer emerged slowly. The flowers she once tried to control became her teachers. She began noticing that the most beautiful things in the garden followed their own rhythm. Blossoms opened when they were ready. Seasons arrived without being commanded. Growth happened through cooperation, not force. And as she watched the garden change throughout the year, she realized that much of her suffering had come not from the flowers, but from her inability to trust life itself. This realization appears in many forms throughout human experience. Sometimes it arrives in a garden. Sometimes it arrives beside a hospital bed. Sometimes it arrives after a heartbreak. Sometimes it arrives in the middle of an ordinary day when a person suddenly understands that no amount of gripping can stop life from moving. There was once a musician named Ethan who spent most of his adult life pursuing perfection. He was a gifted pianist, admired for his technical skill and discipline. Audiences praised his performances. Critics wrote glowing reviews. Yet despite his success, he lived with a constant feeling of tension. Every performance felt like a test. Every mistake felt catastrophic. Every note carried the weight of expectation. Music, which had once brought him joy, gradually became a source of anxiety. Before concerts, he barely slept. During performances, he worried about making mistakes. After performances, he replayed every imperfection in his mind. The more he tried to control the experience, the less alive it felt. One evening, after a demanding concert tour, Ethan visited an older musician named Clara, a retired cellist who had spent decades performing around the world. They sat together in a quiet room overlooking a river. "I don't understand," Ethan confessed. "I've worked my entire life for this, but the more successful I become, the less I enjoy it." Clara listened carefully. "What are you listening for when you play?" she asked. "The notes." She smiled. "Only the notes?" Ethan hesitated. I suppose so. Clara walked to an old piano in the corner of the room and played a simple melody. Then she stopped. Silence filled the room. Neither of them spoke. After several moments, she asked, "What did you hear?" The silence. She nodded. Most young musicians are so focused on controlling every note that they never learn to trust the silence between them. Yet without silence, music cannot breathe. The conversation puzzled him at first. But over the following months, he began reflecting on her words. Gradually, he realized that he approached life the same way he approached music. He tried to fill every space. He tried to control every outcome. He feared uncertainty. He feared mistakes. He feared pauses. Yet the pauses were not enemies. The silence was not empty. It was part of the music. Little by little, Ethan began changing the way he performed. He stopped fighting every imperfection. He stopped demanding flawless outcomes. He became more present with the experience itself. Something remarkable happened. His performances became more alive. Not because he gained more control, but because he needed less of it. The audience noticed the difference immediately. The music felt warmer, more human, more authentic. Perhaps life is similar. Many people spend years trying to remove uncertainty from existence. They try to eliminate every risk, every mistake, every unknown. Yet uncertainty is not separate from life. It is woven into life. Just as silence belongs to music, uncertainty belongs to being human. The more fiercely we resist it, the more exhausted we become. The more we learn to coexist with it, the more freedom becomes possible. This freedom affects something many people struggle with deeply: sleep. Countless individuals lie awake, not because their bodies are unable to rest, but because their minds refuse to release their grip. They replay conversations. They predict future problems. They mentally revisit unfinished tasks. They search for answers to questions that cannot be answered at midnight. The body asks for rest. The mind continues working. What makes this especially painful is that the mind often believes it is helping. It believes that continued thinking will create safety. It believes that another hour of worry will somehow produce certainty. It believes that if it stays alert enough, it can protect itself from future suffering. Yet the opposite often happens. The more tightly the mind grips, the less peaceful it becomes. The less peaceful it becomes, the harder it is to sleep. The harder it is to sleep, the more anxious it feels the following day. A cycle develops. The Buddha understood that peace cannot be forced. It emerges naturally when conditions support it. Sleep is similar. Most people have experienced moments when they desperately wanted to fall asleep but could not. The effort itself became the obstacle. The harder they tried, the more awake they felt. Eventually, sleep arrived only after they stopped trying so hard. There is wisdom hidden in that experience. Many forms of peace work the same way. They arrive when struggle softens. They appear when resistance eases. They become visible when the mind stops demanding immediate control. This does not mean abandoning responsibility. It does not mean becoming careless. It simply means recognizing that some things cannot be solved through constant mental effort. A problem may require action tomorrow, It may not require obsession tonight. A conversation may need attention next week. It may not need to be rehearsed 50 times before sleep. A future uncertainty may eventually require wisdom. It does not necessarily require anxiety right now. As people learn this distinction, something changes in their relationship with life. They begin experiencing moments more fully. They laugh more freely. They listen more carefully. They appreciate ordinary experiences more deeply. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because they stop postponing their attention. One of the hidden gifts of letting go is that it reminds us how precious each moment actually is. The Buddha often emphasized impermanence not to make people sad, but to help them wake up. Everything changes. Every season, every relationship, every stage of life, every breath. When people resist this truth, they often become fearful. When people accept this truth, gratitude becomes possible. The flower becomes more beautiful because it will not bloom forever. A conversation becomes more meaningful because it cannot be repeated exactly. A loved one's presence becomes more precious because nothing lasts indefinitely. Impermanence transforms ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. When we stop trying to hold everything forever, we begin appreciating what is here now. This appreciation changes how we live. It changes how we love. It changes how we rest. Many people imagine that letting go means losing something. Yet often it allows us to receive something we were missing all along. We stop treating life like a possession and start treating it like an experience. We stop demanding guarantees and start participating more fully. We stop measuring every moment according to what comes next and begin noticing what is already here. As the day slowly draws to a close, perhaps there is nothing left to force, nothing left to chase, nothing left to grip quite so tightly. The future will continue unfolding whether you worry about it or not. The seasons will continue changing. Life will continue moving. And perhaps the invitation is not to control that movement, but to rest within it. Like a leaf floating upon a stream, you do not have to push the water forward. Like a musician trusting the silence between notes, you do not have to fill every space. Like a gardener who finally stops pulling the flowers, you do not have to force growth before it's time. Life already knows how to move. The heart already knows how to heal. The night already knows how to become quiet. And perhaps real peace is not found in standing against the current of life, trying to direct every wave and predict every turn. Perhaps it is found in learning how to float a little more gently, trust a little more deeply, and allow yourself to rest within the unfolding of things exactly as they are. There comes a point in many people's lives when they begin to realize that the heaviest burdens they carry are not always physical. They are invisible. They travel in the mind and settle in the heart. They appear as unfinished expectations, old disappointments, unanswered questions, fears about the future, regrets about the past, and quiet resistance toward the way life has unfolded. Some burdens are obvious. Others are so familiar that they no longer feel like burdens at all. A person carries them for years and begins to mistake them for part of their identity. They wake up with them. They fall asleep with them. They build their routines around them. Yet underneath all of them lies a common thread, the belief that life should have been different. Perhaps life should have moved faster. Perhaps someone should have loved us differently. Perhaps a relationship should have lasted longer. Perhaps success should have arrived sooner. Perhaps our health should have remained stronger. Perhaps the world should have been more fair. Perhaps we ourselves should have made different choices. These thoughts are deeply human. Every person encounters them in one form or another, yet they reveal something important. Often the final things we struggle to release are not objects, possessions, or circumstances. They are expectations. We hold tightly to versions of reality that no longer exist. We carry stories about how life was supposed to unfold. Even years after circumstances have changed, part of the mind continues arguing with what has already happened. The Buddha understood this struggle with remarkable clarity. He saw that much suffering comes not only from pain itself, but from resistance to pain. The first arrow is the difficulty life presents. The second arrow is our struggle against the fact that the difficulty exists. The first arrow may be unavoidable. Illness comes. Loss comes. Aging comes. Change comes. The second arrow, however, is often created by the mind. It appears when we refuse to accept what is already true. Acceptance is one of the most misunderstood words in spiritual practice. Many people hear the word and imagine resignation. They imagine weakness. They imagine giving up. Yet acceptance is something entirely different. Acceptance does not mean approving of everything that happens. It does not mean liking every circumstance. It does not mean abandoning effort or refusing to improve situations when improvement is possible. Acceptance simply means seeing reality clearly before responding to it wisely. Imagine standing in the middle of a rainstorm while insisting that the sky should be sunny. No amount of protest changes the weather. The resistance only adds frustration to the rain. Acceptance begins the moment we acknowledge it is raining. Once reality is acknowledged, wise action becomes possible. We can seek shelter. We can open an umbrella. We can adapt. But we cannot adapt to reality while simultaneously denying it. This is why acceptance and equanimity are so closely connected in Buddhist wisdom. Equanimity is the ability to remain balanced amid the changing conditions of life. It is not emotional numbness. It is emotional stability. It is the capacity to meet both pleasant and unpleasant experiences without becoming completely consumed by them. The world continues changing. Success and failure continue appearing. Praise and criticism continue arriving. Yet something within remains steady. Think of a mountain standing beneath changing weather. Clouds gather and disappear. Rain falls. Snow arrives. Sunlight returns. Storms pass overhead. Yet the mountain remains grounded. Equanimity is like that mountain. It does not stop life from changing. It allows us to remain rooted while life changes around us. Many people spend years searching for security in things that cannot provide lasting security. They seek certainty in circumstances, relationships, achievements, or possessions. Yet everything external continues moving. The Buddha's teaching points toward a deeper kind of stability. Not the stability of controlling life, but the stability of learning how to meet life. This leads to another important quality: trust. Trust is not often discussed as deeply as acceptance, yet it plays an essential role in inner freedom. Most people trust only what they can predict. They trust plans. They trust guarantees. They trust familiar patterns. But life has never offered complete predictability. The future remains uncertain. Circumstances remain changeable. No one receives a contract guaranteeing how events will unfold. What does it mean, then, to trust life? It does not mean believing that everything will always go according to our preferences. It does not mean assuming that difficulties will never arise. It does not mean expecting constant happiness. Trusting life means trusting our ability to meet whatever comes. This is a very different kind of trust. Instead of saying, "I trust that nothing difficult will happen," it says, "I trust that I can face difficulty when it arrives." Instead of saying, "I trust that life will obey my plans," it says, "I trust that wisdom can guide me even when plans change." Instead of saying, "I trust that I will never experience loss," it says, "I trust that I can continue living even after loss." This form of trust creates tremendous freedom because it no longer depends upon controlling the future. There is an old story about a traveler named Adrian who spent most of his life moving from place to place. He was not poor. He was not homeless. In fact, he owned many things. Yet wherever he went, he carried an enormous collection of bags. Some contained clothing. Some contained books. Some contained tools. Others contained objects he had not used in years, but refused to leave behind. At first, people admired his preparedness. "You seem ready for anything," they would say. Adrian took pride in this. He believed that carrying more meant being safer. He believed that keeping everything meant avoiding regret. So whenever life presented something new, he added another bag. Years passed. The collection grew heavier. Walking became more difficult. Travel became slower. Simple journeys became exhausting. Yet whenever someone suggested letting something go, he refused. "What if I need it later?" he would ask. Eventually, during a long journey through a mountainous region, Adrian reached a small village. Exhausted from carrying his belongings, he stopped at an inn run by an elderly woman named Miriam. As she watched him struggle through the doorway, she asked gently, "Why are you carrying all of those bags? I might need them." She smiled. "All of them, perhaps?" Over the next few days, Miriam noticed how much effort he spent organizing, protecting, and transporting his possessions. He worried constantly about losing something. He checked the bags repeatedly. He counted them before sleeping. He counted them again in the morning. One afternoon, she invited him to sit outside beneath a large tree overlooking the valley. After a long silence, she asked, "Tell me honestly, which is carrying which?" Adrian frowned. "What do you mean? Are you carrying the bags, or are the bags carrying you?" The question unsettled him. At first, he dismissed it. But later that evening, he found himself staring at the collection piled beside his bed. For the first time, he noticed something he had ignored for years. The bags were no longer helping him travel. They had become the reason traveling was so difficult. The next morning, he removed one bag, then another, then another. Each time he expected panic. Instead, he felt lighter. The road did not become shorter. The mountains did not disappear. The journey did not suddenly become easy. Yet something changed. He changed. As he continued walking with fewer bags, a realization slowly emerged. Much of what he had been carrying was no longer serving him. He had mistaken holding on for security. He had mistaken accumulation for safety. He had mistaken weight for preparedness. And as he walked farther along the mountain path, feeling lighter than he had in years, another question began to form quietly within him. If so much freedom becomes available when we stop carrying what is no longer necessary, what else might be possible if we finally learned how to set down the burdens we have been holding inside for so long? If so much freedom becomes available when we stop carrying what is no longer necessary, what else might be possible if we finally learned how to set down the burdens we have been holding inside for so long? This question followed Adrian as he continued his journey through the mountains. The more weight he released, the more clearly he began seeing something that had been hidden for years. The road itself had not changed. The distance remained the same. The weather remained unpredictable. Uncertainty still existed. Yet his experience of the journey had transformed. For so long he believed freedom would come from controlling conditions. Now he was beginning to suspect that freedom might come from something entirely different. It might come from changing his relationship with conditions themselves. There is an old Zen story about a monk named Ryota who often crossed a wide river in a small wooden boat. Each morning before sunrise, he would row across the water to visit neighboring villages and return before nightfall. The river was usually calm, and over time the journey became familiar. One foggy morning, however, something unexpected happened. As Ryota moved slowly through the mist, he suddenly noticed another boat drifting directly toward him. At first, he assumed someone else was rowing carelessly. He waved his arms. "Watch where you're going." The boat continued approaching. His irritation grew. "Move aside." Still no response. The boat drifted closer. Anger rose inside him. "What are you doing?" he shouted. The collision seemed inevitable. Then, just before the boats touched, Ryota finally saw what the fog had hidden. The other boat was empty. No one was inside. Immediately, his anger vanished. Nothing about the situation had changed. The boat was still drifting toward him. The collision still occurred. Yet the emotional experience became completely different. There was no longer anyone to blame. No one to argue with. No one to be angry at. Only an empty boat carried by the current. Later that day, Ryota reflected on the experience. He realized that many of the frustrations in his life resembled that drifting boat. Again and again, he reacted as though every difficulty were a personal attack. Every inconvenience felt intentional. Every disappointment felt directed toward him. Every obstacle became something to resist. Yet much of life was simply unfolding according to causes and conditions. People acted from their own fears. Circumstances changed. Accidents happened. Plans failed. Weather shifted. Bodies aged. Not everything was about him. Not everything required resistance. Not everything required control. The story of the empty boat has endured for centuries because it reveals something profound about human suffering. Much of our struggle comes from the belief that life should behave differently than it does. We become angry when circumstances refuse to obey our preferences. We become frustrated when uncertainty remains uncertain. We become exhausted trying to force reality into shapes it was never meant to hold. The Buddha's wisdom points toward another possibility. Instead of demanding that life conform to our expectations, we can learn to meet life with openness. Instead of tightening our grip, we can soften it. Instead of insisting that every wave disappear, we can learn how to float. This shift creates a kind of freedom that many people spend years searching for. At first, freedom appears to mean having complete control, complete certainty, complete security, complete predictability. Yet such conditions rarely exist. The more deeply we examine life, the more obvious its changing nature becomes. Every stage passes. Every circumstance evolves. Every success changes. Every challenge changes. Every relationship changes. Even our understanding of ourselves changes. If freedom depends upon controlling all of this, freedom remains forever out of reach. But if freedom depends upon our ability to meet change with wisdom, then freedom becomes available in every moment. This is why the Buddha placed such emphasis on acceptance, gratitude, and non-attachment. These qualities are not separate from freedom. They are expressions of freedom. Acceptance allows reality to be seen clearly. Gratitude allows beauty to be noticed while it is here. Non-attachment allows experience to flow without becoming imprisoned by it. Many people imagine that letting go means losing something valuable. Yet often the opposite is true. What disappears is not joy. What disappears is struggle. What disappears is resistance. What disappears is the exhausting belief that everything must be controlled before peace can appear. When that belief begins to dissolve, life often feels surprisingly spacious. The future remains unknown, yet it no longer feels like an enemy. The past remains unchanged, yet it no longer feels like a prison. The present moment becomes enough, not because it is perfect, but because it is real. As this reflection draws toward its final resting place, there is a simple practice worth carrying into the quiet moments before sleep. Imagine opening your hand, not physically if you do not wish to, but inwardly. Notice how often the mind resembles a clenched fist, holding worries, holding expectations, holding unfinished conversations, holding imagined futures, holding disappointments, holding fears. Now imagine the hands slowly opening. There is no need to throw anything away, no need to force release. Simply allow the grip to soften. Notice what it feels like when the hand is no longer squeezing. Notice the space. Notice the ease. Notice the absence of effort. This image contains a deep truth. A clenched fist cannot receive. An open hand can. A clenched mind cannot rest. An open mind can. A clenched heart cannot fully experience life. An open heart can. Perhaps there is one burden you have been carrying throughout this journey. Perhaps it is a future outcome. Perhaps it is a regret. Perhaps it is an expectation. Perhaps it is a fear that has followed you for years. For a moment, allow yourself to place that burden in the open hand of awareness. Not because it has been solved. Not because certainty has arrived. Not because every question has been answered. But because carrying it continuously has not brought the peace you seek. The future does not need to be solved tonight. The past does not need to be rewritten tonight. The world does not need to be controlled tonight. Your life does not need to be perfected tonight. For so many years, perhaps you have been standing guard over things that were never fully yours to manage. Trying to hold back change. Trying to guarantee outcomes. Trying to protect yourself from uncertainty. Trying to carry more than any human heart was meant to carry. And maybe, just maybe, the deepest wisdom is not learning how to hold on more tightly. Maybe it is learning when to open the hand. The stars do not struggle to shine. The river does not struggle to flow. The seasons do not struggle to change. Life has been moving long before any of us arrived, and will continue moving long after we are gone. There is something profoundly comforting about this. The universe does not require constant management from us. The next breath will arrive. Morning will come. The earth will continue turning. Life will continue unfolding according to countless causes and conditions beyond our control. And perhaps that is not frightening. Perhaps it is liberating. Because it means you do not have to carry everything. You do not have to solve everything. You do not have to know everything. You do not have to control everything. You only need to meet this moment with the wisdom, kindness, and presence available to you right now. The rest can unfold in its own time. So as this day quietly comes to an end, allow the hand to remain open. Allow the mind to soften. Allow the heart to rest. Nothing more needs to be fixed tonight. Nothing more needs to be achieved tonight. Nothing more needs to be solved tonight. Life is already here. This breath is already here. This moment is already here. And perhaps, after all the effort spent trying to control the river, it is enough simply to float beneath the stars and trust that the current knows the way forward. If this reflection spoke to your heart, share in the comments one thing you are learning to let go of. And if you'd like more peaceful Buddhist wisdom before sleep, consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who may need it tonight.